Hey people, Shinobi no Kami here. In this fanfic, due to a tragic event, Naruto awakens the Rinnegan and becomes a monk. How will this affect the timeline? Will it lead him on a path towards peace, or will the consequences of this new power leave a hole in his heart too large to fill? Before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy it. Tell me your thoughts in the comments section. So without any further ado, let's roll the intro. Chapter 1. Fire Part 1. Get out of my store, you damn hoodlum. The sound of a loud thud followed by pained groans and a few choice curses mumbled under their breath were heard through a street in the bustling Kanahagakure no Saito. Of course, the young blonde boy from whom these muttered annoyances were uttered in irritation went completely ignored by the rest of the world, save for one particularly irate shop owner who stared at the boy with poorly concealed hatred. What's the big idea, old man? I gotta get shuriken and kunai so I can train to be a ninja. The only reply the whiskered child received was a huff of contempt as the burly shopkeeper turned away. As if they would ever let a brat like you become a ninja. He was about to slam the door to his shop closed to emphasize that point, but thought better of it, quickly turning to stare heatedly at the blue-eyed visage that was the unwitting center for so much hatred in the village. And don't ever let me catch you in my store again, or there'll be hell to pay. With that, he finally slammed the door closed, the small door sign flipping to open by the breeze in a twist of irony. Yeah, just you see. The young blonde turned to the rest of the people in the street, who continued to go about their day as if this event weren't even happening. You'll all see. I'm gonna be Hokage one day. With that, the whiskered child took off down the street at a surprising speed for such a small and malnourished boy. After he was gone, the residents of the busy shopping district turned to watch him go, some of the older women whispering in hushed voices. Did you see him today? Disgraceful. I don't know what Hokage-sama is thinking about allowing someone like that to join the Shinobi Academy. I know, my little Amy-chan would be in the same year as him. I just know he'll try to corrupt her. Well, I know for sure I'm warning my boy away from him. That little demon won't destroy the next generation as well. Of course, all these conspiratorial whispers were lost on the running child, who was too busy staving off tears percolating at the edge of his vision. Hey Gigi, I need your help. Glittering blue eyes blinked in surprise at the empty office, framed by the panoramic backdrop of Konoha in the expansive window that lit the room. Gigi. The young blonde looked around in mild confusion. It was rare he wasn't able to find his grandfather figure in his office, often poring over various sheets of paper that confused the whiskered youth when he tried to read them over the man's shoulder. He's not here. Well, I guess he's out doing kick-ass ninja stuff. He is the Hokage after all. With that simple piece of 7-year-old logic sorting out his confusion, the boy quickly went to work. Immediately he headed around the back of the large, ornate oak desk, which was piled up with copious stacks of various mission reports and budgeting requests. Not that the blonde was at all interested in those. Instead, he began to rifle through the drawers of the desk, uncaring that he was messing up the painstakingly sorted filing system. Finally, with a whine of annoyance, the whiskered blonde threw up his hands in defeat before running them through his messy golden locks. Why doesn't Gigi have any shuriken or kunai? Suddenly a mischievous grin that many Anbu had come to take warning of over the years split his lightly tanned face as he looked over at the large picture of the fourth Hokage on the wall. Gigi thinks I don't know about his super secret hiding spot. The grin still splitting his whiskered cheeks, the blonde quickly made his way over to the framed photo, pulling it to one side in a smooth motion to reveal a large metal safe. The old man shouldn't underestimate Naruto Uzumaki. The small boy pressed his ear to the cold metal, never once noticing the strange arrangement of kanji and symbol that spread out from the point of contact that glowed a welcoming blue before fading back into the safe. He twisted the dial with well-practiced hands until the last click echoed through the empty room. With a small cry of success, Naruto swung the large metal door open, only to frown with displeasure. He had seen the old Hokage open the safe many times, but he had never seen what was inside. Of course, his childlike mind had instantly thought up many cool and mysterious possibilities, which were all the more reason he was disappointed. A stupid scroll. Of course, the scroll was about as tall as Naruto was himself, but that was beside the point to the young blonde. Of all the things for Gigi to keep in an awesome safe like this, and he chooses a dumb scroll. With a small sigh, the blonde tried to pick up the scroll anyway, never noticing the 3 sets of hands that instinctually tightened over their kunai pouches in the darker corners of the ceiling. With a grunt of effort, Naruto managed to lift the enormous scroll about an inch before he was forced to drop it with a dull thud. Squinting his eyes in an incredible impression of a fox, Naruto frowned at the large scroll before noticing a glint of metal. With a cry of success again, the blonde reached into the safe, pulling out his prize. His cry of delight, however, quickly changed into a look of intense confusion. What kind of weird kunai is this? He turned it over in his small hands, noting the odd 3-pronged shape and kanji written on a slip of paper wrapped around the handle. With a sigh, he tossed it back into the safe. It was useless with such a weird design, probably some ancient antique his Gigi was keeping as a relic of the past. He swung the door closed with a disappointed sigh before sliding the picture back into what he thought was the correct position. With his brow furrowed, the blonde took one last sweeping look around the office before a light bulb seemingly clicked over his head. His short legs quickly carried him back over to the desk, where his hands began to frantically sweep back and forth under the polished wooden surface. Finally, a small, almost unnoticeable click graced his small ears as a secret compartment jutted out the side of the desk. This one was much smaller than the safe, and its contents confused Naruto even more. All there seemed to be were a small orange book, a strange glass sphere, a few sheets of paper, and a normal-looking scroll with a spiral design printed on the front. Nothing again. How can Gigi have no kunai in his office? Naruto slammed the small compartment back into place with an irritated grunt before walking out of the room, a silent black form dropping down to the floor behind him out of his notice. When the Hokage walked in later on that afternoon with the delegate from Kumo, he only found a rather amused dog-masked Anbu waiting for him with interesting news. Naruto once again walked back down the slightly less busy streets, the people beginning to retire to their homes as the sun dipped beyond the horizon. A frown marred his face as he thought about his predicament. Tomorrow he was supposed to start at the Shinobi Academy. It was a year earlier than most did, but the Hokage had assured him he would do fine. The only problem was that all the stores refused to sell him an shuriken or kunai. The small blonde was so lost in his thoughts he wasn't able to react in time when a tall man suddenly appeared in his path. The result was Naruto bouncing back like he had just walked into a wall, while the tall dark-haired man just sneered derisively. Naruto looked up, expecting to be reprimanded for being so careless. However, all he saw was the telltale logo of the Konoha police force and a flash of red eyes before the man walked on, ignoring the blonde as he had never even been there. Naruto picked himself up off the dusty ground, mumbling to himself about unobservant people before the figurative light bulb once again clicked over his head. A grin snaked its way across his face as he took off on small legs in the direction of the Uchiha compound. Those people with funny red eyes always have kunai pouches. I'm sure if I borrow a few, nobody would notice. With that in mind, and with a small chuckle to himself, Naruto quickly found himself winding through the streets towards the western districts of Konoha. A good half an hour later, and the whiskered child was staring up at the rather imposing stone wall that separated the Uchiha compound from Konoha proper. He never really thought about the Uchiha all that much, but he found them having a wall around their compound sort of strange. With a small dismissive shrug, he quickly began to scale the wall, using handholds and cracks that would normally be too small for any other hand to grip. Finally, with a slightly comical wiggling of his legs, he flipped himself over and dropped to the ground on the other side of the wall. He rubbed his head sheepishly as he looked down at the small flower bed he had crushed from his impromptu landing, but quickly pushed it from his mind. It was darker now, the sun had fully set beyond the horizon, and it provided Naruto with great cover as he stealthily, at least to him anyway, made his way through the back garden of whoever's home he had landed in. Strangely, none of the lights in the house were on. It wasn't that late at night. In fact, Naruto would usually be preparing himself a cup of ramen for dinner about now. To satiate his curiosity, he peered in through a low window, but sure enough, the house seemed deserted. However, instead of trying to think why the blonde just grinned, this would make it all the easier to grab some kunai or shuriken. He tried to lift the window but it wouldn't budge an inch. With a small grunt of annoyance, Naruto abandoned it and quickly hurried back through the garden, out onto an empty street. Once again the blonde found it curious that nobody was out. He had never seen a street in Konoha so quiet before midnight. Feeling slightly less sure of himself but staying strong regardless, Naruto scampered across the street, ducking into another alley between two homes. Stopping to think for a moment, he remembered that all the clan compounds in Konoha were somewhat self-sustaining, which meant there had to be stores to buy things, and he hoped that would include ninja supplies. Ducking his head back out into the moonlit street, he nearly squealed with delight as he spotted exactly what he was looking for. The store was across the street from him, a large sign hanging out front that Naruto couldn't quite make out, but the various weapons in the window were visible clear as day, as was the large fan symbol emblazoned across the door. With as much speed as his small body could muster, he dashed across to the door, giving it an experimental push only to find it locked. Frowning, he looked around, noting the small flap at the bottom of the door, obviously made for whatever animal the shop owner kept. He was about to go around to the side alley to find another way in when he heard the sound of approaching footsteps echo through the silent streets. His eyes widened in surprise and fear of being caught. Naruto immediately ducked down, pushing himself through the small animal flap that was never designed for human use. He quickly found himself stuck, his hips just a little too big to get through. However, as the footsteps came closer, he found a new burst of energy, scrabbling with all he could and finally managing to push his lithe body into the store. He sat there, leaning against the door, just panting as he calmed himself down. He was beginning to regret coming here. Generally people left him alone in Konoha, but sometimes the people would be slightly less forgiving. He noticed the people with red eyes tended to be among that group. Check around some more, I was sure I heard something. Naruto's heart nearly stopped beating in his chest as he heard the male voice call out from the street. Yeah, I don't see anything, I'm sure you were just hearing things. I swear, you've been too jumpy lately, gotta calm down. Another voice joined the first, sounding much closer than his companion, making Naruto break out in a cold sweat. Shut up, you know Fugaku-sama's orders. While the meetings are taking place, the streets have to be cleared. We don't want anybody to find out what's going on. If there's a spy out here from the Hokage, we have to flush them out and deal with them. Even in his fear, Naruto managed to be confused by the conversation taking place now painfully close to him. Why would the Hokage need to spy on his own shinobi? That didn't make sense at all. To satisfy his burning curiosity, he ever so slowly poked his head up and looked out the window, only to immediately duck back down as he caught a glimpse of burning red eyes. Hey, what was that? The voice sounded suspicious and footsteps began to draw near to the shop he was hiding in. What? The voice sounded somewhat bored, as if he was just eager to go home and relax instead of trudging around outside for threats he was certain wouldn't be there. There was something in the shop, I'm sure of it. Naruto gulped in a way he hoped wasn't too loud, even though it seemed deafening in his ears. He quickly scurried further into the shop, hoping to use the shadows to hide himself. On the way, his hand closed over the hilt of a kunai from one of the counters and he instinctively clutched it to his chest as if it would protect him from anything. He pressed himself as close to the wall as he could beneath a counter as he heard the doorknob rattle a few times before the sound of a key clicking in a lock was heard. Footsteps came next, each slap of a sandal against a wooden floor like a cannon firing right next to the terrified blonde. That next minute was agonizing on Naruto's nerves as the Uchiha continued to walk around the small shop, before sighing to himself and walking towards the door. As his hand touched the doorknob to close it, the blonde let out a small breath he didn't even realize he had been holding. Unfortunately, it wasn't small enough, and before the air had fully left his lungs, a hand wrapped around his collar, yanking him to his feet so that his eyes were level with a set of angry Sharingan. Well, what do we have here? A little young to be a spy, don't you think? He sneered across at his companion, but Naruto made use of his distraction as lashed out with the kunai clutched to his chest on instinct. With a cry of pain and anger, the man dropped Naruto, clutching his arm that was now spraying blood in a long arc. Naruto wasted no time and sprinted out of the store, slipping between the legs of the man's surprised companion in one smooth motion before vaulting to his feet and taking off at a sprint. The two Uchiha weren't surprised for long and they quickly took off after the tiny child, using their shinobi training to enhance the muscles in their legs to take off at incredible speed. By the time Naruto was dropping back down on the other side of the wall, the two shinobi were right behind him. Using speed and energy, the blonde didn't even realize he took off again, staying just ahead of his pursuers. He did everything in his power to keep the two Uchiha from getting him, sliding through holes in fences that they were too big to get through, using his knowledge of the alleyways to confuse them, and even at one point grabbing a peacefully sleeping cat, and throwing it at the men. It turned out Tora, as the name on its collar read, didn't appreciate the early wake-up and managed to keep the two would-be capturers busy for a surprising amount of time. Long enough at least for the terrified blonde to reach his destination. It wasn't all that uncommon for Naruto to be chased due to his recent history as somewhat of a prankster. However, in those situations, he would have pre-planned his escape, usually with a few hidden surprises for his pursuers, giving him ample time to make it to the Hokage Tower or his home where he knew he was safe. Right now though, he had no plan, no tricks to pull out of thin air, and there was only one place nearby he would feel safe. He burst through the flaps in front of Ichiraku's ramen, surprising the young teenage girl washing dishes behind the counter. She didn't have time to even cry out in surprise before the whiskered blonde jumped the small counter, using the seats as a springboard. The brown-haired girl just looked down at his quivering form in shock, but only had time to do that before two men appeared in front of her, almost making her drop the bowl she was cleaning in fright. Quickly regaining her composure, she placed a well-worn smile on her face. "Welcome to Ichiraku Ramen, I'm Ayame, how can I help you?" One of the men, his Sharingan active and spinning wildly, gave the small shop a once-over before giving a contemptuous snort. He spank on his heel and marched out, the scowl on his face only intensifying. The man behind him gave Ayame an apologetic look before hurrying out after his companion. Letting out a small sigh, Ayame turned to the still shaking Naruto, a small frown alighting on her usually upbeat and smiling face. "What did you do now, Naruto?" She let out another sigh as the blonde boy gave her a sheepish, if not slightly strained smile as he rubbed the back of his neck, out of habit or nerves she couldn't tell. She finally allowed a soft smile to play across his lips as she offered him a hand, which he gratefully took, clinging to her arm like a lifeline. She brought him around to the back of the shop, leading him like a stray dog to the couch in the small living space back there. "Just stay there, Naruto, I'll go make us some tea, okay? Then you can explain whatever silly prank you pulled this time." Naruto gave a small quivering nod, earning him a glowing smile as Ayame quickly moved back to the kitchen area. "Tea, thanks Ayame-chan." The girl turned around again at the door, holding onto the frame as she smiled serenely at the little boy she considered a little brother in everything but blood. "Hey, what are big sisters for me?" Naruto finally seemed to relax at that, settling more into the couch as Ayame finally moved off to prepare some tea. An older man with graying hair and a fatherly smile seemingly permanently set on his wrinkling features chose that moment to walk down the stairs to see what all the commotion was about. "Ah, Naruto, my boy, what brings you to our humble abode?" The small blonde turned at the familiar voice, a small but true smile appearing on his whiskered face at the sight of one of his precious people. "Chuki Oja-san." The man simply chuckled at the exuberant cry as he settled a hand on the young boy's shoulder, his calloused palm easily dwarfing the boy's small frame. "Now who did you manage to upset this time, my boy? I hope it wasn't a Hyuga, you know how they reacted last time." He let out a throaty chuckle as he fondly remembered. Naruto half crawling into his store, one arm and leg having been at the receiving end of the Hyuga's fearsome taijutsu style. It had taken a few hours before the boy could feel anything at all in those limbs. Naruto on the other hand just had an indignant if somewhat sheepish look on his face. "I didn't do anything. They chased after me." Chuki just gave him a knowing smile. Honestly, he believed the boy's pranks would one day get him in a lot of trouble. Still, he and Ayame would be waiting for him with a warm bowl of ramen and a warm smile at the end of the day, nothing less for their best customer and his surrogate son. Of course they did. Naruto, and Iwagakure has a solid gold statue of the fourth Hokage. Naruto looked up at him with wide blue eyes, his face looking like a monkey who had been given a truckload of bananas. "Really? That's so cool, Tt Ibeo." Chuki just gave a small sigh. He should have known better than to try and use sarcasm on somebody as innocent as Naruto. "No, You see Naruto, the blonde boy in question blinked in surprise when Tyuki suddenly cut off before jumping in surprise as he felt some kind of warm liquid spray across his back. He looked around only for his eyes to go wide in shock and terror. Tyuki was on the floor, unmoving, a single kunai sticking out of his blood-soaked throat. Behind him stood the two Uchiha who had been chasing him, a cruel glint in the spinning red eyes of the one in front. Oromaru, what are you doing? The one behind seemed shocked by his companion's actions, his eyes flickering between the dead man on the floor and his fellow Uchiha. Shut it, Takaho, there can't be any witnesses. Do you know what will happen if word gets to the Hokage about the coup? Unfortunately, Ayame chose that inopportune moment to walk back into the room, a tray of tea balanced in one hand. Time seemed to slow as she took in the scene in front of her, two men standing over Naruto, kunai poised to strike, her father on the floor, blood still spilling from his throat as his empty eyes stared at her. Her scream carried out into the night only to cut off a moment later as three kunai found their way into her stomach. She could only stare down at the growing red patch forming on her usually pristine apron, a quizzical expression on her face as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. It only lasted a moment before she fell to the floor, first to her knees then, with a dulled thump, onto her side. Silence once again fell on the small room as Naruto stared in shock and horror at where his surrogate sister lay on the floor, unmoving and pale. The Uchiha's arm was still outstretched from throwing the kunai and his friend was looking at him in even more shock. Then, as if a silent command had been given, everybody moved. Naruto scrabbled to his feet at the same moment the lead Uchiha lurched forward to grab him. The small blonde just avoided his grip, sliding across the floor to where Ayame had fallen. Ayame ne-chan. Please Ayame ni-chan. He tugged fruitlessly at her clothes, willing her with all his might to wake up, to turn over and show that she was okay, that she was still alive. Suddenly rough hands grabbed him by the collar, yanking him around to face Sharingan eyes once again. The black tomo framed by fields of red spun slowly at first before picking up speed. Soon they were a blur, as hypnotizing as they were frightening. Naruto suddenly felt incredibly drowsy, like a huge portion of energy had been ripped from his body. He couldn't explain it, it was like a battery had been pulled out of him leaving him cold and tired. Out of slowly closing eyes, he caught sight of his hands, colored red by Ayame's blood, and suddenly something new welled up in his chest. Anger, a blind, roaring fury that he had never felt before. Fury at these people for taking those people precious to him, rage at the world that could be so cruel to him, and most of all anger at himself, at his own inability to protect the people that meant more to him than his own life. Pain, sudden blinding pain welled up behind his eyes like somebody had lit them on fire. Suddenly he wasn't tired, he had more energy than ever. Everything seemed to slide into perfect focus, colors coming alive like they never had before. Then a pressure seemed to build up inside of him, welling up and begging to be released. Everything flashed for a brief moment in perfect clarity, time frozen as if captured by a picture then, nothing. Naruto woke up with a groan. He wasn't sure how long it had been but he definitely wasn't in the hospital of his apartment so it couldn't have been long. In fact when Naruto looked up he could see the night sky, the moon stared back at him blankly. He lifted his head wearily, surprised to find himself in what looked like a large crater in the ground. He didn't want to be here to explain what happened when Ninja arrived so he quickly staggered to his feet. His vision swam for a moment but in a way he was unused to. Everything seemed more vivid than it used to, colors were brighter and far more visible than they should be this late at night. What's more, a strange glow seemed to permeate the area, as if everything was emitting a strange ethereal light. Confused and disoriented he quickly clambered out of the crater, his hands finding purchase on the recently disturbed earth with surprising ease. After a few moments of aimless wandering down the road he finally stopped, falling to his knees. He never even noticed when he passed right out the gates, the Chunin guards strangely absent from their post. He just stared at the ground for a moment, the hard paving stones feeling rough and uncomfortable underneath his knees, not that he particularly cared. First one, then two small drops of liquid pattered onto the ground, staining it a slightly darker color. He stayed there for a while, just crying to himself silently as the full force of what happened hit him. At some point the skies above him opened and the rain began to pour, lightly at first but with increasing intensity. It was as if the heavens themselves shared in his lament. The only family he had ever known, the only people he had ever known to truly love and care for him were gone, killed in front of him. Not only that, but he had killed. There was no mistaking the sight of the two mangled corpses next to the large crater, the police force symbol emblazoned on ragged strips of cloth. It didn't matter that he had no idea how he did it, he just knew he did. One moment there was a surge of power behind his eyes, the next he was waking up in a nightmarish scene. He hadn't even seen Ayame or Tsuki's bodies and he wasn't sure he wanted to after seeing the state the two Uchiha were in. After what seemed like an eternity of just kneeling there in the rain, Naruto pulled himself back onto two shaking legs. He couldn't go back, not now, not after he had killed two shinobi of the leaf. He may have been called naive and sometimes even stupid, but he knew the punishment for murder. With a choked sob he nearly fell back to his knees. He was a murderer. What would his Gigi think of him now? What would Ayame or Tsuki think? They were the kindest, most caring people he had ever known. What would it be like for the Hokage to have to sign his death warrant? He shook his head viciously. He wouldn't let that happen. He would just go away, far away where he couldn't hurt anybody anymore and nobody could hurt him. His mind made up, if not still slightly shaken, Naruto took first one hesitant step before breaking out into a run. He didn't know where he was going and at that moment he didn't particularly care, just that it was away from Konoha, away from what used to be his home. Chiriku was having a strange day, that much was certain when his teacup had unexpectedly cracked, staining his robes. After that, one of the clocks on the walls had fallen off as he passed and he had found a dead bird on his windowsill. He had never been a particularly superstitious man despite being a monk. He had seen far too much in his time in the 12 Guardian Ninja for any of that nonsense. Even so, it was fairly hard to ignore all the strange omens he was receiving. And now he was on guard, dutifully patrolling the grounds of the fire temple. It was normally a rather mundane task, loathed by his fellow monks almost as much as grave duty. So imagine his surprise when he stumbled across a small blonde child, looking as if he hadn't eaten in some days, just lying in the middle of a forest clearing. He may have been a trained warrior, but he was a monk first, so his first inclination was to rush over and see if the child was okay. He let out a small sigh of relief when he felt a pulse from the boy's wrist and immediately picked him up. His first reaction seemed to be right. The child was terribly malnourished and would require immediate care. He was walking back quickly when the boy began to stir, making soft groaning noises as he subconsciously buried himself further into Chiriku's warm body. He began to open his eyes and when the monk looked down he nearly dropped the boy. After all, it wasn't every day you looked into the rippled pattern of the Rinnegan. Chapter 2, Fire Part 2. Be not afraid of growing slowly, be afraid of standing still. Proverb. Ah, I see you're awake, that's good. Naruto's vision was fuzzy at best as he opened his eyes, his head swimming from exhaustion and hunger. He tried to lift his head only to suddenly feel incredibly nauseous, nearly falling off the somewhat Spartan bed he was lying on. Careful, child, you shouldn't be trying to move just yet. A wrinkled but strong hand gently grasped his shoulder, guiding him back down onto the bed. The blonde tilted his head slightly, wincing as a light on a far wall nearly blinded him. What's going on? Where am I? His voice sounded incredibly weak, his throat dry. As if in answer he suddenly found a wooden cup pressed up against his parched lips. Gratefully he sipped at the cooling water, sighing in relief as he felt his thirst somewhat quenched for now. He tried opening his eyes again with limited success, only managing to catch the silhouette of the man sitting beside him. You are at the fire temple, child. Young Chiriku found you while he was patrolling the grounds. It is a sanctuary for priests and monks such as myself to find solace in meditation. Naruto simply blinked in response, finally managing to prop himself up on his elbows and right his vision. The man sitting next to him was old, very old. His face was wrinkled almost to the point where it seemed his eyes were permanently squinted. A small pointed beard jutted from his chin, the hair grayed with a few streaks of white. Even so his face was kindly and serene, as to be expected from a monk. However, the most amazing thing about him was that he seemed to be enshrouded in an aura of pure energy, his body aglow with that same ethereal blue light Naruto had seen ever since the incident which led to his self-imposed exile from Konoha. But where that energy had before seemed unruly and chaotic, around the monk it flowed calmly like water passing through a gentle stream. I see you do not know much of the world if my words confuse you. The man's smile took on a slightly more mischievous hue as he talked, his eyes squinting in a way Naruto found eerily reminiscent of his own fox-like look. Suddenly he blinked in surprise as he realized what the man had actually said, the information taking a few moments for his confused mind to handle. Hey, are you calling me stupid? His response was a throaty laugh as the man placed a placating hand on Naruto's shoulder. The blonde instinctively shied away from the contact, finding it unpleasant for a reason he couldn't quite place. It was familiar. Not at all, my lad. The old man looked away for a few moments as if in thought, however it was obvious even to Naruto that it was exaggerated. Let's just say, ignorant. He gave another kindly smile before his gaze took on a more serious disposition. Let me have a look at your eyes, child, I need to check on something. He leaned forward but Naruto quickly backed away from the man's hands. The old monk merely took his hands back, holding them in a placating manner. What are you gonna do to my eyes? The man chuckled in what he hoped was a disarming manner, waving his hand dismissively. Nothing, I merely want to take a look at them. Naruto seemed hesitant to comply at first but eventually he leaned forward, opening his eyes for the monk to see them properly. Ah, young Chiriku was correct then. He stayed like that for a few moments, gazing intently into Naruto's eyes as if they were the window to enlightenment. What is it about my eyes? And how do you see them when you squint so much? Once again the elderly monk merely chuckled, amused by the boy's brazen question. My, aren't you an energetic one? Tell me, what do you know about those eyes of yours? Avoiding Naruto's question the man leaned back, gazing at the blonde evenly. Naruto simply looked confused as he blinked a few times, looking around for something reflective. My eyes. They're blue and they let me see stuff. What's it to you? The wizened monk raised an eyebrow at that as he reached inside the sleeve of his robe, producing a small hand mirror. Blue, you say? Is that what you see? Naruto took the small mirror presented to him with caution, before nearly dropping it in surprise. He stared intently into the reflective glass, looking one way, then another just to check what he was seeing was real. My eyes. What happened to my eyes? They look all weird. As Naruto fretted about his new appearance the old monk gazed at him calmly, however a few more wrinkles appeared on his brow as he leaned back in. Those, my boy, are what are known as the Rinnegan, a dojutsu like the Sharingan or Byakugan. The blonde, drawn away from the mirror in his hands by the elderly voice, gazed at the monk in confusion. Dojuku. Sharingan. Bakulan. The monk chuckled to himself, not sure what he was thinking, trying to explain things such as these to a child. He offered a hand which the blonde seemed at first hesitant to accept but in the end took it anyway. Walk with me, child, we have a lot to talk about. Naruto gazed up at him, his new steely purple eyes wide with childlike innocence, even though behind that was something else. What's your name, my boy? They left the small room Naruto had been lying in and the blonde took the opportunity to look around. The corridor they were now in seemed just as bare and Spartan as the room he had awoken in. Seeing this, the old man beside him gave a warm, knowing smile and gestured to the bare walls and floor. This is a temple, child, we have little use for material possessions or gains. They are distractions from the pursuit of enlightenment. Seeing Naruto's confusion he chuckled, rubbing the back of his head sheepishly in a very un-monk-like manner. We don't have a lot. Understanding now the boy's eyes widened as he nodded his head. Yeah, I didn't have a lot back in Ko, he trailed off, looking down at the floor with a frown, the hand that wasn't occupied in the monk's clenching into a fist. Chukaku. Naruto looked up in surprise, shaken from his thoughts by the warm voice. The monk was looking down at him, his eyes squinted and a comforting smile across his features. My name is Chukaku, head monk of the fire temple here in Hai no Kuni. And yours? Naruto blinked once before coughing and rubbing the back of his head. Naruto. Chukaku seemed to draw in a deep breath, looking out a window into the grounds of the temple where a group of monks were running through their kata in perfect synchronization. Ah, Maelstrom, a good strong name. I feel your future will be filled with great things, if not hardship to get there. Seemingly pulled out of his trance-like state he blinked rapidly, regaining his composure and earlier kindly stance. But as to only be expected, of course, we all must go through hardship to fully appreciate the gift that is life. Nay. Naruto just stared at him strangely for a few moments in awkward silence before Chukaku coughed into his hand and began walking down the corridor again. Yes, well, anyway, you are more than welcome to stay here, Naruto. We cannot promise you a comfortable life, but you will have companionship and peace if you so choose. The blonde just stared up at him in wonder, his eyes wide in amazement. You would let me stay here? Chukaku merely chuckled to himself, not even bothering to turn around. Of course, what kind of monk would I be if I turned around a starving child on my doorstep? Come now, we shall go find you some food and a place to sleep. I'm sure Sora will be delighted to finally have somebody his own age to talk to. Suddenly the elderly monk felt Naruto stop, his hand slipping out of his wrinkled grip. He turned back only to see Naruto standing there, his head lowered with his messy hair shadowing his eyes. I can't. He sniffed loudly and Chukaku could see tears rolling down the boy's cheeks. I don't deserve it, I'm a monster. The young blonde was shocked though when he suddenly felt himself being embraced. Chukaku had taken him into a warm hug, gently patting the boy's back in a comforting manner. Don't say that, Naruto, you are not a monster. I refuse to believe any child such as yourself could ever be a monster. He stood up and for a moment Naruto was sad to feel the warmth from the embrace disappear. Quickly he found an old wrinkled palm held out before him, offering for him to take it. Come now, tell me your story. Naruto stood there for a moment before he wiped the tears off his face and took the outstretched hand. Alright Naruto, what do you know about chakra? The small blonde beside the old monk looked up to him with wide, naive eyes. Chitara. Chukaku merely chuckled as he patted the boy's head, much to the blonde's ire if his scowl was anything to go on. Naruto was now dressed in the more traditional robes worn by the Fire Temple monks, the loose linen clothing tied by a white sash. Chakra Naruto. It is the lifeblood of the world, the energy that permeates everything and is produced in every living creature on the planet. By meditation and physical exercises one can slowly gain control over their chakra, molding it and forming it ways that allow us to do many wonderful and otherwise impossible things. He looked down with the same kindly smile only to see Naruto look away disinterestedly. With a raised brow Chukaku lightly bobbed the small blonde on the head with the end of his shikuju. Hey, what was that for? Chukaku merely put on an innocent smile as he hid the staff behind his body, despite it being taller than he was. Whatever do you mean, Naruto-kun? Although it is very poor manners to not pay attention when somebody is speaking to you. The young blonde merely scowled at the elderly man, rubbing his head lightly where he had been hit. However, when it looked like he would retort angrily, Chukaku merely twitched the hand holding his staff and Naruto backed off. Sorry, but this chakra doesn't sound all that amazing. Once again a solitary eyebrow rose on Chukaku's forehead as he began to walk towards a nearby wall, his shikuju jingling with each step. Oh no, you say you come from Konoha, right? Naruto didn't answer, but Chukaku caught his tensed posture out of the corner of his eye. That's a ninja village. At the mention of shinobi the old monk could tell he now had Naruto's full attention. Chakra is what allows ninja to perform their various techniques in jutsu. If possible, at the mention of jutsu Naruto became even more attentive. Jutsu. Like fireballs and those cool exploding tags. Chukaku gave a small smile and a curt nod which only widened Naruto's eyes. Correct. You see, by balancing and combining the physical and spiritual energies in one's body you form chakra, which can then be controlled through the use of hand signs to mold in the way the technique requires. He stopped, standing next to one of the imposing walls of the temple, higher than most of the buildings it protected. However, that is not the end of it. Those skilled enough do not even require hand seals and can mold chakra through sheer concentration and focus. Naruto was practically bouncing on his feet at this point, so Chukaku decided to hammer the point home. In fact, I believe one of the earliest techniques taught to young ninja is the surface clinging exercise, like so. With that the old monk kept walking, putting first one foot, then another on the wall until he was high above Naruto, who could only stare up with amazement in his eyes. Using chakra to stick to a surface, no matter what it is. He walked back down at a leisurely pace, making it seem like he wasn't defying gravity but instead taking a calm stroll. Of course there are other ways to mold chakra, you even mentioned one. At that the blonde gained a confused expression which made Chukaku chuckle lightly. Those exploding tags, they work slightly differently. Instead of molding chakra inside the body, you apply it to special seals that mold it for you in whatever medium you choose, usually ink. This is a branch of the ninja arts known as fuinjutsu. It has as many, if not more uses than its more traditional counterparts. At this point Naruto seemed to have calmed slightly, just allowing himself to absorb all the information he had been given. So what does chakra look like? Chukaku gazed at Naruto oddly for a few minutes before quietly chuckling to himself, irritating the young blonde. Hey, it's not like it's a dumb question or anything. The elderly monk quickly quietened down, patting Naruto's back fondly as he sighed. No, of course not. In fact, it is an excellent question, but probably one I should be asking you all things considered. Naruto just looked up at him and in a manner as eloquent as ever he simply said. This time Chukaku suppressed his chuckle as he knelt down on creaking knees to look Naruto in the eye. You my boy are the one with the dujutsu, those rare eyes that allow humanity a glimpse at the unseen. He looked around, finally settling his gaze on a nearby pebble which he picked up. What do you see here? Naruto just blinked at the small rock, unsure if it was a trick question or not. A pebble. Chukaku just nodded with an expectant gaze. Is that all you see? Naruto just nodded with a furrowed brow. Yeah, why? Is it some kind of sacred stone or something? Chukaku laughed out loud at that as he absently tossed the stone over his shoulder. Of course not my boy, it's just a pebble. Now look at me, what do you see? Again Naruto seemed puzzled by the question as he gazed at the old monk intently. I see you. Chukaku gave a sagely smile as he stood up to his full, if rather unimpressive full height. But is that all you see? Naruto blinked at that, frowning as he peered at the old monk. Well, you have this weird blue outline like you're glowing. Finally Chukaku grinned, patting the small boy on the shoulder as he turned to move on further into the temple. Well then there's your answer. What you are seeing, or at least I can only assume, is chakra, my chakra to be specific. You could not see it in the pebble because it is not alive, so it cannot produce its own energy like plants or animals can. At this Naruto frowned, falling into step behind the wizened monk. But the pebble had an outline too. Chukaku stopped at that, blinking once before turning back to look at Naruto. It was kind of green, but it was weird, like I couldn't quite see all of it, like a puzzle piece without the rest of the puzzle. He groaned at that, one hand going up to pull at his hair in aggravation. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like that. Chukaku merely patted him gently on the shoulder, a serene expression on his face. It's all right Naruto, some people have spent their entire lives trying to unravel the mysteries of chakra and the many forms it comes in. Few succeed and fewer still are willing to divulge that information. In fact the first, and last, was the very same man whose eyes you share. Naruto looked up in surprise at hearing there was somebody else with eyes like him. Who? Chukaku gave him a mysterious smile as he pushed open a door into a large room, filled with shelves stacked to the brim with various books and scrolls. The old monk walked over to one of the older shelves in the room, some of the corners having gathered many cobwebs. He tutted for a few moments as he looked over the shelves before picking out a book and blowing the fine layer of dust that had accumulated. He opened it, skimming through the pages until he came across what he was looking for. This man, the sage of the six paths. He dropped the book onto the desk, earning him a few stern looks from the other monks trying to read as well as a small cloud of dust which had Naruto coughing. When his eyes finally stopped watering he looked down at the page the book was open to. It was an image of a man, or at least the silhouette of a man, standing before an enormous beast with 10 tails and a single red eye filled with 9 tomo in concentric circles. A sword was in one hand and a shakuju in the other, held up as if warding the beast off. It seemed to be a rubbing of a wood carving as there were no photos from that era. Who was he? Chukaku looked down at the image of the man said to be the founder of Shinobi, the first man to both discover and unravel the mystery of chakra. Well, by your eyes I suspect your ancestor, distantly of course. He was said to have lived over 1,000 years ago after all. Chukaku flipped the page revealing another image, this time of a rather crudely drawn but nonetheless shockingly similar image of a pair of Rinnegan eyes. Naruto traced the circles radiating out from the pupil with awe in his eyes, even as his other hand lifted up near his own eyes. What was he like? Chukaku chuckled lightly at that, He could remember standing before this very book in one of his countless sessions with his own master, the previous head monk, asking that very same question so he knew just what to say. Unfortunately not much is known about him. History doesn't stretch that far back as far as written records go. From what we know he seemed to be some kind of wandering holy man, spreading his teachings about chakra and peace. Eventually he battled a great evil, banishing it from the world forever. Naruto thought back to the enormous creature from the first image and shuddered. He couldn't imagine fighting something like that, and it was only a picture. He was also said to have created the moon. Naruto spun around, looking up at the older man with incredulity, to which the monk just chuckled. But I don't put too much stock in that particular legend. Naruto returned to slowly tracing the image of the Rinnegan, awe in his eyes. He must have been powerful. Chukaku just nodded at his side, an intense look on his wizened features as his gaze drifted from the book to Naruto himself. You know, they say his power came from his eyes, the eyes you now have. Naruto turned back to him, blinking in confusion as Chukaku placed a warm and firm hand on his shoulder. You may have been given a powerful gift, even if the circumstances were terrible. Those eyes give you unrivaled potential, you know, and with that potential comes great responsibility. I just hope you'll remember that when you have power one day. Naruto stared at him for a moment with wide eyes before nodding resolutely, fire in his eyes. Good, I see great things in your future, Naruto-kun. Now come, there's somebody I want you to meet. Chiriku-senpai, why are we out here? The small blonde was sitting in the middle of the largest training ground in the temple. It was towards the back and surrounded by high stone walls with the same seals that protected the main door of the temple. It was used by monks seeking to train new techniques that they hadn't fully mastered yet, where they wouldn't pose a threat to the rest of the temple. For safety reasons, Naruto, we don't want anybody getting hurt when we try this. Naruto just groaned as he rocked back and forth. The large stone slabs that made up the floor were very uncomfortable. Try what? You keep acting all mysterious, senpai. Chiriku finally gave a satisfied nod as he looked over 3 seals he had been setting up on the wall of the training ground. It mirrored the 3 others on all the other walls, chakra suppression seals. The bald monk honestly didn't believe that such a small boy could pose that much danger, but his master had told him to take extra precautions, so that is what he was doing. Okay, we're all ready to start now, Naruto, are you ready? Chiriku turned to face his latest student. The two had been properly introduced shortly after Naruto and Chukaku's talk in the library. Naruto had thanked him for saving him, and quickly the two developed a teacher-student type relationship. It was refreshing for the warrior monk to have a new inquisitive mind to ask him questions. Ready for what, senpai? The bald monk merely smiled as he walked back over, sitting down in front of Naruto in a cross-legged position. After your... Chiriku frowned as he tried to think of the best way to say this to a child. Incident in Konoha. He winced as he caught the sudden tension in Naruto's posture, but continued anyway. He thought it would be better for Naruto to confront his past instead of trying to ignore it. You said you awoke in a crater. Master Chukaku believes this may be one of the inherent powers of your Rinnegan. We want to find out exactly what triggers this so we can replicate and, in time with training and meditation, control it. Naruto seemed less sure but nonetheless nodded, if hesitantly. Alright, now I'm going to have to ask you to remember that night. Remember just what you saw, how it felt, everything. Naruto blinked in surprise before looking down, his hair overshadowing his eyes momentarily. That was the problem. He couldn't forget. He remembered every detail of that night like it was forever burned into his memory, that, and everything after it. The feel of Ayame's blood on his hands, the intense fear and self-loathing as he stared up at those spinning red eyes, the coppery tang in the air and the echoes of Ayame's scream still ringing through the room. Chiriku became alarmed as he felt an enormous amount of chakra build up inside Naruto. It was far more than a boy of his age should have been able to mold. Heck, it was big for a Chunin-level ninja. He backed away from the boy when he noticed tears begin to stream down his face, the pressure building up inside him growing stronger as the chakra was diverted to his eyes in one massive burst. Words that weren't his own suddenly appeared in Naruto's mind. It felt like saying them was the most natural thing in the world, instinctual almost. Shinra Tensai. Just like that, the room exploded. When the smoke finally began to die down and Naruto stopped coughing, he once again found himself in a large crater, this time slightly shallower thanks to the seals suppressing a great deal of the damage. Even so, the effects of whatever he did were immense. Cracks had appeared in the slabs all around the crater, in some cases snaking out to the walls. Now that he could actually observe the after effects, he could see it wasn't a perfectly circular crater. Most of the damage was in front of him, making it more egg-shaped. He blinked suddenly as he realized something was wrong. Chiriku-senpai. Naruto glanced around, not spotting the bald monk anywhere, at least until the rest of the dust in the room settled. Chiriku-senpai. The blonde dashed to his feet, rushing over to Chiriku's still form propped up against a wall. His robes were tattered and in places torn, while it looked like he himself had been thrown against a very hard rock, repeatedly. Naruto just stood there in front of him, his eyes wide and watering. He collapsed bonelessly to his knees, his fingers clutching the fabric of the older monk's robes tightly as his body was racked by intense sobs. Suddenly he felt the body beneath him move as Chiriku took in a shuddering breath. The trained mink looked up into the mop of blonde hair, trying to bury itself into his chest before chuckling lightly, only to wince in pain as his chest burned. Well, the first thing we need to do is work on meditation. Can't have you doing this to every training ground we have, nay. The small blonde looked up, tears in his eyes and staining his whiskered cheeks before he wrapped his tiny arms around Chiriku as far as he could. The monk winced at the pressure but just resigned himself to rubbing comforting circles on the boy's back as he looked around the training field. The damage was immense, even with the suppressing seals that he knew for a fact could withstand an A-ranked fire jutsu without so much as a scorch mark. Yet here this 7-year-old body had managed to put a crater in it about a foot deep with just a simple burst of chakra, at least that was what it had seemed like. It was certainly no wind jutsu. Chiriku had felt his share of those sparring against Asuma. He had never seen anything quite like it before, and that said a lot in his opinion. Such power for one so young. Master Chukaku was right about you, Naruto, you will grow up to be strong. The bald monk smiled at the thought even as another streak of pain flared in his chest, and I'll be there to guide you along the way for as long as I can. Chukaku looked up from his meditation as he heard a knocking on his fusuma. Soon after, Naruto meekly shuffled into the room, his hair hanging over his eyes as he managed to find something incredibly interesting about his feet. Yes, Naruto-kun, what can I do for you? The boy looked up for a moment, catching the older man's gaze for a split second before looking away. In that moment Chukaku saw fear, regret, a whole multitude of emotions running across those rippled purple eyes. I don't think I can do it. Chukaku stood up at this, walking over to the now trembling boy. Do what, Naruto? He placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder only for the boy to pull away, wrenching himself out of the firm grip. Everything. This training. Learning to control this power. He looked up now and it was painfully obvious the boy had been crying. His eyes were reddened and there were still streaks running down his cheeks from the tears he had shed. Please, Master Chukaku, I don't want to hurt people anymore. Chukaku sighed at that, kneeling down on his old knees so he could look at Naruto from his level. Naruto, you wanted to be a shinobi, didn't you? The blonde looked up at that, blinking in confusion despite the new tears already welling up in his eyes. Did you know that as a shinobi you would have been asked to kill people? Chukaku almost flinched as he saw the horrified look on the boy's face. He hated to see such innocence lost, but he knew Naruto would only torment himself further if he didn't do something now. No ninja is without blood on their hands, not even the Hokage. Chukaku shook his head at that, especially not the Hokage. Naruto had stopped shaking now, looking at the elderly monk with a look caught between his sorrow and slight interest. But do you know what separates most shinobi from common thieves and murderers? Naruto blinked once, somehow unable to tear his gaze away from Chukaku's as he slowly shook his head. They know what they fight for, be it for the home they spent so long protecting, or the bonds they made with the people they care about in order to protect them. The elderly monk sighed, even he had at one point fought and killed. You know, Naruto, after some men experience war and bloodshed they forever vow never to harm anybody ever again, to shy away from all conflict. His eyes hardened at that as he almost lost himself to a lifetime of nostalgia and regret. Those people are cowards. Naruto's eyes widened at that, his shuddering had stopped and the tears were no longer flowing. Seemingly remembering what he was doing, Chukaku looked back around, a warm expression back on his face. You see, Naruto, peace is not about avoiding fights, it's about choosing them. Naruto blinked in an uncomprehending manner as Chukaku once again grasped him firmly on the shoulder. he didn't shy away from the touch this time. Choosing them. The head monk nodded once, a rather far-off look in his eye before he shook it off. You have a great power at your disposal, and with patience and training you can master it, becoming strong, very strong. But it is what you do with that strength that will define what kind of person you will become. Knowing how and when to use that power is what matters. The quest is finding what exactly you are willing to fight for, and that is a journey every human will embark on at some point in their lives. Chukaku left it at that as the room descended into a calm but not uncomfortable silence. Finally the small blonde seemed to find some resolution deep inside himself and nodded firmly, spurred on by the kindly monk's words. I think I understand now, thank you master. Chukaku just gave a small serene smile as he watched the blonde quietly exit his room, a thoughtful expression that had no place on any child's face firmly set into his features. Chukaku sighed as he got back up and walked back to the spot he was in before to resume his meditation. Before he did though, he took one last look at the retreating shadow he could see through the Fusama. I hope so. Naruto-kun, for your sake. Chapter 3, Fire Part 3. Every artist was first an amateur, Ralph Emerson. Damn it Naruto. Stop moving around so much. The sound of limbs slicing through air and the occasional grunt of exertion echoed through the small training room on the eastern edge of the fire temple as two combatants constantly moved back and forth in a graceful dance of punches and kicks. Maybe you just need to move faster Sora. A grinning blonde ducked under another high kick before gracefully sliding through his opponent's legs. Before he could remove the other combatant's base though, the other boy jumped up, aiming for a heavy axe kick. At the last moment though, he suddenly found himself falling faster than he expected, throwing him off balance and leading to him falling in a crumpled heap on the ground. That's another point to me Sora. The dark blue-haired boy looked up with a pained groan at the hand outstretched in front of him before taking it with a few mumbled curses. How many does that make now? 5-2. Sora scowled at the grinning blonde before pushing the hand away in irritation. I would have had you that time if you hadn't used your gravity manipulation. It's cheating. Naruto just chuckled as he patted his friend on the back. All's fair in love and war, as Chiriku-senpai says. Sora just scoffed as a smile finally broke out on his face. Yeah, and what would Chiriku-senpai know about love? At that both boys burst out laughing, the joyous sound bouncing around the small training area. Oh. At the sound of a third voice both boys immediately froze before shakily turning their heads to look into the amused expression of the very man they had been talking about. And what does Chiriku-senpai know about love? Outside, two monks were passing by the training ground when they heard two loud gulps followed swiftly by two even louder thumps. The monks simply looked at each other once before sighing and continuing on with the same thought. Naruto and Sora again. Sorry Chiriku-senpai. Back inside the training ground, Sora and Naruto were rubbing their aching heads while Chiriku was the picture of serene innocence, despite the shakuju he was subtly resealing into a pouch on his hip. Now boys, final bell is about to ring, we don't want you all sweaty before you go to bed, you know how Shigesu would feel about that. Both boys nodded immediately with slight fear in their eyes. They knew exactly how the old grumpy keeper of the temple would feel about that, and the mere thought had them rubbing various phantom pains. Alright Chiriku-senpai, but first I gotta show you something. The older monk simply raised an eyebrow at the excited blonde. A year living in the temple really hadn't done all that much to calm his energetic spirit. Would this thing happen to be a certain technique Master Chukaku has forbidden you from using in any of the indoor training grounds? The blonde smiled sheepishly as he rubbed the back of his neck, glaring at Sora as the other boy chuckled behind his hand. He was remembering the other times Naruto had supposedly mastered the more powerful techniques at his disposal. No come on Chiriku-senpai, I swear I have it this time. I know what I was doing wrong. The older monk stared at the whiskered child for a few moments as Naruto bravely met his gaze before sighing and gesturing outside. Fine, but not inside, we don't need a repeat of last time. As if to stress his point, he looked across the open field they were entering to a large hole in the wall on the far side. The result of Naruto's latest attempt at his technique. Not gonna happen, just watch me. With an excited cry, Naruto dashed across the fields to face one of the pre-prepared training dummies. Before adopting a standard fighting stance, Sora dropped to the ground, getting comfy for something he was sure was going to be hilarious while Chiriku watched more intently. Naruto relaxed himself, concentrating on the pool of energy deep inside himself, drawing it out and directing it through his body. He allowed it to build up inside him but controlled it from becoming too strong. He had learned the consequences of that the hard way. Finally he pushed the chakra to his eyes and hand at the same time, simultaneously bringing one arm up so his palm faced outwards in one smooth motion. Shinra Tensai. Sora and Chiriku could only watch on amazed as the training dummy was summarily obliterated by the veritable wall of gravitational forces slamming into it. It soared across the field, flying out of sight over the roof of the next building over, raining stuffing and bits of hay down as it went. Unfortunately that wasn't the only thing that went flying. Wooa! Almost as fast as the training dummy was blasted away, Naruto was sent flying back in the opposite direction. However he came to a much quicker stop, embedded in a wall a few feet away. Like a marionette with its strings cut he flopped to the ground, leaving a surprisingly accurate imprint of his body in the wooden wall. A few seconds of silence passed before Sora burst out into an uncontrollable fit of laughter. Even Chiriku had to stifle a few chuckles before walking over and helping his student up from the ground. I'm impressed, Naruto, you finally managed to direct the force of the technique, although you might need to work on counteracting that force on yourself. Naruto just nodded limply, his eyes looking slightly distant as he gazed up at the three sets of his senpai looking down at him. Soon after Sora came over and gave Naruto a shoulder to lean on, but not before he finished his laughing fit. Even so, while he found his friend's misfortune as funny as any good friend would, he had to be impressed by the sheer power behind the attack. He certainly wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of it. Alright Chiriku-senpai, I'll help Naruto to his room. We were going to have another spar but I don't think he's in that condition right now. Chiriku just nodded once before turning and retiring to his own quarters, even as the evening bell began to toll around the temple. Sora hefted Naruto up so that his arm was slung around his friend's shoulders and began walking in the direction of the living quarters. You're always doing this, you know. His only response from the blonde was a groan and a small chuckle which made the monk in training smile. You're always trying to do the impossible. Again he didn't get much of a response from his injured friend. Even so, you'll go ahead and try it over and over again until you get it right, won't you? He looked down and found Naruto grinning weakly up at him, a knowing glint in his squinted eyes. And then you'll try and one-up me. Sora chuckled at that but didn't deny Naruto's statement. What can I say? You're a bad influence on me. And stop doing that, you look like Master Chukaku when you narrow your eyes. Naruto just nodded wearily before allowing his head to droop again. By now they had reached Naruto's room and with a bit of maneuvering on Sora's part he managed to slide open the fusuma and lie Naruto down on his futon. Get some rest and we'll see tomorrow how the score turns out. He looked around when he got no reply but saw that Naruto was already asleep. Sora just chuckled as he slipped out of the room quietly. His friend was a real idiot sometimes. Sora, this is Naruto, he'll be staying at the temple with us for the foreseeable future and I want you to show him around the temple. Blonde hair peeked out nervously from behind Chukaku's robes, catching the young trainee monk's attention. Ohio, I'm Naruto. The blue-haired youth just stared at the boy for a few moments before tentatively holding out his own hand as they shook. It was an obviously awkward scene, neither child having had good experiences with people their own age, or in Sora's case, no experience period. Good, I know you two will become the best of friends, now I have some paperwork to do, so run along. With that the elderly monk turned on a heel and calmly trotted away from the scene. So what's it like being a monk? Sora just blinked at the whiskered boy before looking away at a wall. I don't really know, I've always lived here so I don't know much else, but it's nice. Naruto nodded at that with a small smile as his posture became less tensed. So what do you do for fun? Sora blinked again, finding this very different to talking with the monks who were always very reserved and self-assured. Well, we have breakfast in the morning followed by meditation and training, then lunch then. Naruto waved his hands in front of him, cutting the boy off. No, I mean like for fun. In your spare time and stuff. When you're not training or anything. Sora frowned as he looked at Naruto. This was a surreal experience for the boy, that was for sure. Well, the library is always available for recreational reading. Naruto blinked once before hanging his head down, a metaphorical cloud suddenly appearing over his head. That sounds so boring. Sora suddenly gained a tick mark over his eye as he slammed Naruto over the head with his covered arm, his eye twitching in irritation. The monk's pursuit of enlightenment is not boring. It's a spiritual journey into one's soul, and as such, Sora trailed off as he saw Naruto miming along to his words with his hand with a decidedly unimpressed look on his face. Like I said, boring. The blonde flopped to the ground, adopting an incredibly poor attempt at a meditative pose. I mean, what's the big deal with sitting like this anyway? Sora's eye began to twitch again, suddenly regretting getting lumped with this obvious idiot. Suddenly though, a superior smirk appeared over his face as he too got onto the floor, adopting the correct pose for meditation with his palms facing up, his hands in loose fists and his knuckles touching. Well, Chiriku-senpai says that it takes the utmost skill and concentration to properly meditate. Obviously such things are beyond you. At that, Naruto looked up in annoyance, his own tick developing over one eye. Oh yeah, I bet it's not so hard. I could meditate way better than you could. He looked over the position Sora was in and quickly adjusted his own posture to match. If Sora hadn't been so annoyed with the blonde, he might have been impressed at Naruto's first attempt. Instead, he simply raised a haughty eyebrow in mild contempt. Amateur. When he didn't get any response, he looked up to see Naruto's head turned away, his eyes closed in a mockery of meditation. It was obviously an exaggerated way of ignoring Sora. The blonde quickly found a fist buried in his skull and an angry Sora above him. Hey, don't ignore me. From a nearby window, Chukaku watched the whole scene with his mouth hidden by his sleeve. A mild chuckle escaped his lips as he observed the two boys' interaction. He knew it was a good idea to introduce the two, for the other monk's amusement if nothing else. Chukaku looked up from his desk with a fond, nostalgic smile as he thought back on the last year since Naruto had joined the temple. It was quickly marred with a frown, however, as he once again picked up the piece of paper he had been reading. He sighed as he placed it to one side, quickly drafting up the same response. He had written every time he received a letter like this. Finishing with a flurry as he signed his name, he sealed it into an envelope ready to give to the passing mail nin the next morning. He sighed again as his gaze drifted over to the seal on the envelope the message had come from, the seal of the Hokage. He would change the wording every time, sometimes offering things in return, but the gist was always the same: bring Naruto back to Konoha. In the same manner, his answer never changed from a firm and resounding no. As long as Naruto was under the roof of the fire temple, Chukaku would see he never had to return to his old home. The young blonde had told him about his life there after some coaxing, and the elderly monk was appalled. He had worked out from the boy's treatment and the village's vehement requests for him to be returned just what he was, as well as from his appearance just who he was, although it was speculation until he could find evidence. Even so, he found the village's blatant hatred of a child horrific, especially considering the burden that was already on the poor boy's shoulders. What made it all the better was that he had the power, the authority, and the influence to keep Naruto here, whether the Hokage or anybody else had anything to say about it or not. The fire temple was firmly under his control as head monk, and in turn he reported directly to the fire daimyo, nobody else. He had known the man since he was just a baby in his mother's arms and had always made sure to be in his favor. What's more, the man knew better than to upset the person who controlled his protection detail, the 12 guardian shinobi. Of course, it was always Naruto's decision. If the boy ever actually wanted to return to his old home, Chukaku would not stop him. He would of course be sad to see the boy leave. The temple had been a much brighter place since the boy was introduced. However, he had never seen any indication Naruto wanted to leave. In fact, the boy seemed incredibly happy here, like he had found a smile long since thought forgotten. Chukaku was suddenly broken from his musings as he heard a loud commotion somewhere outside. He moved to the window, a troubled frown creasing his already wrinkled brow as he spotted what looked like a fire on the other side of the temple. However, it was when he saw the first flicker of red and felt a malevolent aura wash over the area that he immediately rushed from the room. Naruto's short-lived sleep was troubled, filled with orange fur and blood-red eyes before he awoke with a start. Cold sweat covered his body, making his robe stick to his skin uncomfortably as he panted. He took a deep breath before raising himself onto his elbows. Glancing over at the clock on his wall, he noted it had only been about half an hour since Sora had brought him to his room. More than that, though, there was a presence in the air, weighing down on him like an invisible weight. Getting to his feet, he was shocked to see flames out his window, His eyes widened even as his feet carried him out of his room and towards the fire. He got there to see it was one of the smaller temple buildings. The walls and roof were up in flames. The orange and yellow tendrils of fire were licking at the sky as smoke billowed out from the building in choking sheets. There was a gathering of monks, some attempting to douse the flames with buckets and water ninjutsu while others seemed to crowd around something else. He took a few hesitant steps toward the second group until he felt a familiar hand grip his shoulder. "No, Naruto, you have to stay away, it's dangerous." He looked up to see Chukaku, his normally serene features marred by worry and concern. Suddenly a monk was tossed out of the group like a ragdoll, landing not far from them. It distracted Chukaku long enough for Naruto to break out of his grip and rush forward. He didn't want to be treated like a child. This was his home now and he would protect it with his life if he had to. Ignoring Chukaku's desperate cries, Naruto barged his way past two monks only to freeze in surprise at what he saw. Sora stood at the center of a ring of monks, except it wasn't the Sora Naruto had known for the past year. He was hunched over, a crazed expression in his eyes as an evil grin lifted the corners of his mouth. The arm that he usually kept covered was a mottled red, spiky protrusions jutting out at random and the fingers had become more like claws. Worst of all, his entire body was enshrouded by a cloak of intense red chakra, bubbling like it was alive. Three tails slowly swayed back and forth behind him. Sora. Naruto's cries only served to draw the boy's attention to him, his now red and slitted eyes locking firmly on the blonde. However, there was no recognition there, only an insane bloodthirsty glee, like a predator spotting its next meal. Naruto took a step back as he saw the pure malice behind the boy's eyes. It wasn't Sora, it just couldn't be. "Naruto, stop." The blonde just barely heard Chiraku's voice along with a few others, no doubt monks concerned with his safety. He ignored them anyway, rushing forward towards the creature his friend had become. He didn't make it within 3 meters of him before a malicious red tail swatted him away from the side, moving faster than he could even follow. He landed a few meters away, his clothing ripped and torn in a few places and he knew there were a few spots that would bruise the following morning. Even so he picked himself up on shaking legs, a desperate look in his eye as he looked at his friend. Sora had turned away from him, obviously having lost interest in the prey that put up barely any fight. Naruto's features set into a determined mask as he watched another monk get batted away by those tails. He set his feet into a solid stance, already drawing up the chakra from inside of him and directing it to both his eyes and his hands. Discreetly he placed his other hand behind him, pointing in the opposite direction as he finally released the pent-up chakra. Bansho Tenin. Naruto immediately felt the pull on his body like gravity had been temporarily inverted, but the hand he had behind him kept him glued in place. Sora on the other hand was in no such luck as he suddenly found himself flying through the air towards Naruto, unable to react in time to do anything about it. The blonde had already pulled his hand into a fist, ready to knock some sense into his friend, however at the last moment it unfurled. The possessed Sora blinked in confusion as he suddenly found himself wrapped up in an iron-like grip. Naruto's hands were firmly wrapped around his friend's back, his chin over one shoulder. The tails behind him waved uncertainly for a moment, as lost as the one guiding them. "Please Sora, I don't understand what is going on, but please stop this." A solitary tear rolled down Naruto's cheek, evaporating as it touched the cloak of pure chakra covering Sora. "Just stop this, let me help you." He hugged tighter, ignoring the pain as the malevolent chakra began to burn his skin and rip away at his already tattered clothing. "Stop it." Suddenly Sora seemed to freeze, the tails stopping in mid-sway as if caught in some invisible giant's hand. Ever so slowly the long red tails began to shrink back into the cloak, even as the cloak itself slowly began to leak off of Sora's body. The chakra seemed to twitch in mid-air before slowly being absorbed into Naruto. As it did so, the burns and bruises across Naruto's body began to heal so fast the monks around them could actually see it happening. Finally, when the entire cloak had disappeared and Sora's features had returned to normal, the two boys collapsed to the ground, Naruto still clutching Sora tightly to him. Chiraku and Chukaku immediately rushed over to see if they were okay. Aside from Sora's intense chakra exhaustion and a few burns across his skin, they were perfectly fine, just unconscious. Chukaku let out a long sigh of relief as he looked down at the two before turning to the assembled monks. He was simply glad there had been no casualties, however he would still have to explain that to the rest of the monks tomorrow and he knew that would be exhausting. Not to mention Naruto was going to be asking questions too and Chukaku was sure he would be hard-pressed to answer them. Alright, start putting out those fires, we'll begin repairing the damages tomorrow, for now get some rest. As soon as the murmuring dies down and the monks began to disperse he took another look at the two boys on the ground. How can two boys so young bear such a heavy burden? Drip. Naruto felt strangely at peace, the air was still but not humid or uncomfortable. Drip. The ground beneath him, while hard, was not inherently painful, he had grown used to relatively hard bedding anyway. Drip. There were no aches vary his body like he had expected there to be. Drip. He gently moved a hand up his body, feeling for where he knew he had been burned by that foul chakra. Drip. Strangely all he felt was his normal smooth skin, not even any bandages. Drip. Likewise his clothing seemed fresh, there was no noticeable damage. Drip. In fact. Drip. Shut up. Naruto blinked as his voice echoed out through, wherever he was, it was certainly not the temple that was for sure. He got to his feet, once again marveling that he didn't feel at all hurt and his skin was unblemished. He looked around, his steely purple eyes taking in his strange surroundings with a frown. As far as he could tell it seemed to be the basement level of some kind of industrial building. He had found himself in one once when he was exploring in Konoha, except the one he found himself in was much cleaner. Pipes ran the length of the ceiling, disappearing off into the darkness in both directions of the seemingly endless corridor. There were many of them but one in particular caught his eye as it was much larger than the rest. It was also the only one that was leaking, obviously the cause of the irritating dripping. Sure enough he watched as a single drop of some foul red liquid gathered at the bottom of the pipe into a droplet before falling to the floor. Whatever it was Naruto knew better than to touch it. When it made contact with the floor it sizzled for a moment, eating away at the ground. However more amazingly the floor seemed to immediately repair itself, the small hole disappearing like it had never been there. He watched this repeat 3 times before tearing his gaze away, it was oddly hypnotic. Having nothing better to do Naruto began to walk down the corridor, it didn't seem to matter which way he took, they looked exactly the same. Every so often he would reach another leak in the pipe, the only indicator he was actually moving at all. Finally though he reached a fork, he blinked, looking down both identical passageways before shrugging and heading right. After maybe another 5 minutes of walking without any indication he was getting anywhere Naruto finally stopped. He liked to imagine that a year in a temple had somewhat calmed him and given him some semblance of patience, however the truth was. Shinra Tensei. The area around Naruto erupted in an explosion of pure gravitational forces, his hands outstretched to either side to evenly distribute the blast. However when he opened his eyes he nearly fell to his knees in shock and despair, the walls were completely unharmed. There wasn't even a single indication his technique had done any damage, not even the pipes seemed affected, they just kept dripping away. However Naruto did manage to spot one strange thing out of it. Just to test it he began to build up chakra within his body again, feeling the flow in his pathways as it circulated at a faster rate under his direction. His ear twitched as he looked up at the pipes above him, it was unmistakable. Whatever was flowing through the smaller pipes sped up when he began to gather chakra and likewise slowed down when he harmlessly allowed it to disperse. Weird. With an irritated sigh Naruto just resigned himself to walking along the pathway. However no sooner than he put one foot in front of the other he felt it, that same malicious aura that Sora had been emitting. His eyes widening in panic Naruto took off at a sprint down the corridor in the direction he felt the presence coming from. If Sora was having another attack he needed to be there for his friend. After another 5 minutes of running as Naruto became increasingly worried he finally turned a corner only to skid to a stop. In front on him was a massive room, a change from the otherwise cramped hallways, but the most noticeable feature was the enormous metal gate spanning the length of one wall and behind it. Naruto couldn't be sure. Darkness stretched on beyond the gate showing no visible floor or ceiling making it seem like Naruto was staring out into nothingness. Of course it didn't stay that way for long, 2 enormous eyes cracked open in the darkness as Naruto stepped into the room. Their slitted black pupils framed by red stared through him, piercing him with their gaze. They were followed by an equally large mouth, teeming with teeth as it stretched into a horrific facsimile of a grin. Each gleaming white tooth was taller than Naruto was himself and looked like they could tear through just about anything. So my jailer finally honors me with his presence and with a gift of my own chakra no less. How very. The two massive eyes narrowed slightly as whatever invisible head they were attached to lowered to better look at Naruto, simultaneously pulling in a deep breath of air. Thoughtful. Large white claws, much bigger than the teeth, appeared at the base of the cage door, gently stroking the bars with a deafening ring of metal. While a terrifying sight, it did give Naruto the impression that whatever this thing was, he was safe as long as he stayed away from the bars. Are you not going to speak Rinnegan? It has been so long since I have had the pleasure of company, 8 miserable years in fact. Naruto gulped, trying to hide just how frightened he was of this thing, whatever it was. Demon was the first word that sprung to mind, but upon thinking of that word Naruto suddenly remembered his life in Konoha, those quiet whispers when they thought he wasn't listening. They too had called him demon, but Master Chukaku had told him they simply didn't understand him, and it was their ignorance that led to their hatred. Hello, I'm Naruto. The great eyes once again focused on the small child, the head lowering even further so that they were almost at eye level with one another. It wasn't that hard considering Naruto was about as tall as the diameter of the eyes. I know your name, Rinnegan. I listened to you shout it out every time you made that foolish declaration of becoming Hokage. The creature seemed to spit the word Hokage like it left a sour taste in its mouth. By its voice Naruto would assume it was male, but it was so loud and booming he couldn't really tell either way. What's yours? Suddenly the creature laughed, a deep, bellowing chuckle that resounded in the small space, at least small in comparison to itself. However, the laugh contained no humor, it was more mocking than anything. Just because you have those eyes, Rinnegan, do not presume you can hold a candle to their original owner. The creature slammed its remaining invisible paw down somewhere in the darkness beyond the cage, the boom resounding through the room. Its eyes narrowed dangerously as Naruto didn't even flinch, its mouth once again stretching into a sickening grin. Do you not fear me, Rinnegan? Its voice was low, like a soft grumble. Despite its sheer volume in Naruto's ears, it also didn't particularly sound like a question. Naruto stood firm though, quickly shaking his head defiantly. Master Chukaku says that fear is the natural human response to something we don't understand. But if we don't choose to try and understand, it will lead to ignorance and unfounded hatred. Then that hatred will only lead to more pain, suffering and fear. The creature in the cage almost seemed amused by this, its head rising up into the darkness even as its eyes never left Naruto's unmoving form. Don't hope to believe you could ever even try to understand me, Rinnegan. I am a being beyond your comprehension. The culmination of millennia of hatred and rage. Naruto looked down at that, breaking eye contact with the creature for the first time since meeting it. Master Chukaku told me that nobody is born hating. It is only their experiences, their losses, their sufferings that drive them to hate, and that hatred is only the most extreme expression of love. He looked back up and saw the creature regarding him with what might have been curiosity, it might also have been contempt. Whatever it was gone before Naruto could really see, and the creature was lowering its head back down, its eyes narrowed but firmly fixed on the blonde. After a few moments of tense silence it finally spoke out in a deep but low tone. For now you may call me Kyuubi, now begone Rinnegan, this idiotic conversation has already bored me. Naruto suddenly felt a tug from behind as if he had been snagged by some invisible rope before he was violently yanked back into darkness. However, before he left he caught a glimpse of the Kyuubi's full form, that of an enormous nine-tailed fox. Chapter 4. Fire Part 4. The best way to make your dreams come true is to wake up, Paul Valère. Ruto. Naruto. Naruto. The voice seemed to echo in his head like he was underwater. Woo. The blonde wearily blinked his eyes open, wincing as he managed to stare directly into a ceiling light. His eyes clenched shut as it felt like he was being repeatedly smacked over the head. No, wait. Ah. What was that for, old man? The blonde glared angrily at the wizened monk, who only offered an innocent smile in return, Shikuju returning to its place behind him. Good, you're up, Naruto-kun, we were beginning to worry. Naruto merely glared at Chukaku, rubbing his head as he mumbled a few choice curses under his breath. You got a funny way of showing it, master. His eyes not even opening for a second, the older monk reached around his back for the staff again. What was that, my boy? The blonde immediately had his hands up in front of him, and strained grin in his face as he attempted to placate the irritated monk. Nothing. Nothing, master. Chukaku just continued to smile, but with a sigh of relief Naruto noted the staff had once again disappeared to that null space that Chukaku seemed to be able to draw upon at will. Good, my ears aren't what they used to be, so I had to be sure. Naruto felt a large drop of sweat gather by his brow before he suddenly looked around, a more intent look on his features. Sora. How is he? He noticed he was back in his room, the blinds closed for all the good they did at keeping out the irritating rays of light from the early morning. Oh, don't worry about that, Sora's fine. In fact, he woke up a few hours before you did. I believe he's out training right now. Naruto blinked in surprise at that. He didn't know what was going on with Sora, but it seemed serious. Just how long had the two been out? As if sensing Naruto's thoughts exactly, Chukaku gave a small chuckle as he gestured towards the wall clock, proudly displaying that it was around midday. Don't worry, boy, you were only out for the night. Both you boys didn't have a scratch on you after a few hours. Again Naruto blinked in surprise. He was no medic, but he was sure wounds like they had weren't supposed to heal that quickly. Wait, training. Chukaku just hummed out a yes as he bobbed his head once in the affirmative as the blonde took the opportunity to pull himself up into a seiza position. Shouldn't he be resting or something? The older monk merely gave a knowing smile as he looked out the window, listening out for the usual sounds of the bird song as well as the rhythmic tapping of the shishi-adoshi. He was rather insistent. I believe he had some issues to work out, and nothing beats some hearty exercise to clear one's head. Naruto frowned at the word issues. Usually Sora would come to him if he had problems and vice versa. They were supposed to be friends. Speaking of which, Naruto suddenly had a thought as he remembered back on his strange encounter with the Kyuubi. It felt far too real to be a dream, but he didn't know what to make of it. Master. Chukaku only raised a brow as a single eye glanced in his direction, but Naruto had known him long enough to know that meant he was listening. I had a strange dream while I was unconscious. There was this strange place full of corridors and pipes that I was wandering through, and then there was this giant room with a huge cage. At the mention of a cave, Naruto suddenly found himself at the full attention of the head monk. And did you see what was behind the cage? Naruto blinked in surprise. It almost looked like Chukaku was taking what Naruto said seriously. Yeah, at first it was just some big eyes and teeth, but when I left I caught a glimpse of it. It was a massive orange fox that called itself the Kyuubi. Naruto was shocked to see Chukaku's eyes open in surprise. He had never seen the head monk's eyes open before. You say it referred to itself, as in you talked with it? Naruto nodded nervously as the old monk turned away, once again looking out of the window. However, this time he wasn't truly looking. Naruto could tell his thoughts were elsewhere. But it was just a dream, right, master? Chukaku took a quick glance at the boy, noting his nervous and insecure expression. It was so alien on Naruto's usually exuberant and confident face. Finally the man let out a sigh that really carried his age as he slowly got to his feet on aching knees. Naruto, come to my study in a few minutes. There's something I need to talk with you about. But first I must go get Sora. There is something you both need to know. And without further ceremony the old monk just left, leaving a highly confused blonde in his wake as he quickly made his way towards the training grounds. Naruto, Sora, this is going to be very hard for you to hear, and honestly, I feel it is too early for me to tell you these things. However, I believe that should I not explain them now, you will be forced to live in confusion later on. Both Naruto and Sora were sitting in Chukaku's study, the only other room in the temple besides the library that actually had chairs. Even then they were only moderately more comfortable than the floor. Chukaku himself sat behind a fairly plain wooden desk that was built for function rather than beauty. The elderly man took a deep breath with his eyes closed in thought before catching both boys' eyes. You both know of the attack 8 years ago on Konohagakure. After getting two slightly unsure nods he continued, it may not have been spoken about much in Konoha, but it was hardly secret. But before I explain that, you must first know about the Biju. He waited a moment, but sure enough the two boys looked confused at what he said. Nobody knows quite where they came from or even what they truly want, but we do know they are powerful. There are 9 of them in total, each marked by the number of their tails. He saw a glint of recognition in Naruto's eyes, but he quickly silenced any query with a wave of his hand. They are enormous constructs of chakra given form and life. and if I can trust a certain source of information, intelligence. The thing that attacked Konoha those 8 years ago was the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the most powerful of the 9 Biju. Its motives were unknown, but in the end it destroyed over half the village before it was defeated at the cost of the Yondaime Hokage's life. Except chakra is energy, and like all energy it cannot be destroyed, only moved or changed, so in essence it is impossible to truly kill a Biju. At best it would simply reform as the consciousness pulled its physical form back together. He waited to see if the boys were following him, and after seeing they understood so far he continued. That's why over the years human began to seal Biju away like one might a kunai into a scroll. They feared the power the creatures possessed, and aside from a select few with abilities strong enough to control or subdue the Biju, it was the only way. Unfortunately it is not that simple. People quickly found that something as powerful as a Biju could not be contained in any mere object. Even the most powerful sealing items paled in comparison to the most powerful of the 9. Instead a new way was discovered. The creatures could be contained within a living human vessel, a host and prison to the creatures, consciousness and power. Of course not soon after that people found ways to weaponize these sacrificial vessels, and the Jinchuriki were created. He sighed sadly as he looked back down at the 2 boys. Is anything clearer now? He felt a tug at his heart as he saw Naruto looking down at the desk, his eyes shadowed by his unruly hair. Sora on the other hand just seemed confused, looking at his friend curiously as his gaze alternated between the blonde and the elderly monk. I don't understand, why are you telling us this? Surprisingly it wasn't Chukaku who gave him his answer but Naruto, his head still lowered. Because we're Jinchuriki. He looked up finally, his brow furrowed in a frown but his eyes sharp and attentive. Aren't we? He stated as such, but the tone of his voice made it clear it wasn't really a question. Chukaku sighed deeply. People didn't give Naruto enough credit, he was really much sharper than he appeared. Not quite. Naruto, you're a Jinchuriki, and from what you told me about your dream I would say you contain the 9-tailed fox that attacked Konoha. It was most likely sealed into you by the 4th Hokage in order to stop the creature's rampage. Seeing Naruto's head dip back down he turned to Sora, who continued to look around confusedly, completely lost. Sora on the other hand is a rather unique case. He cannot have a Biju inside of him as they are all currently accounted for in their various villages, however he certainly has the chakra of one within him. Even Naruto looked up at that, confused by what the elderly monk meant. I believe somebody gathered up the chakra expelled by the Kyuubi on the night of its attack, before sealing it directly into Sora, making him somewhat of a pseudo-Jinchuriki. That was what that incident was, Sora tapping into the power sealed within him. Unfortunately, as you witnessed, the chakra of a Biju is immensely potent and so intertwined with its consciousness that it can hold their will, even after separation from the creature itself. The Kyuubi is known for being a beast of hatred and rage. It is no surprise that its chakra contains those same dark intents and is no doubt drawn upon when the user is in sync with such emotion. Naruto looked up at that, looking around at his friend who this time was the one to dip his head. It's a great power, but also a great burden. However, just like with any ability or technique, with enough patience and practice. I don't want it. Chukaku and Naruto looked around at Sora in shock. He had stood up from his seat, allowing the wooden chair to clatter to the ground. His chest was heaving and his eyes were brimming with tears. For a second Chukaku could have sworn he saw a flicker of red enter his eyes. I never asked for this power. Get it out of me. His shoulders suddenly slumped as he felt all the anger leak out of him. He looked around to see Naruto gently holding his sleeve. He didn't know why, but it felt like that single touch was all that was stopping him just storming out the room. It was calming. Unfortunately, Sora, there has never been a method of safely extracting Biju chakra once it has been sealed into a host. He looked thoughtful for a moment, only half noticing Sora's angry, yet dejected face. On the other hand, like I said, you are a unique case. Perhaps if we all do it. Chukaku sighed, wondering when it became so commonplace for people to interrupt him mid-sentence. He looked over at the young blonde, a mask of pure determination set on his features as he looked at Sora. I'll find a way to help you, even if I have to take on your burden myself. Sora was simply shocked. He knew Naruto was his friend, but he never expected such a passionate response. A small grateful smile appeared on his face as he pulled Naruto into a grateful embrace. Thank you, Naruto, I can really count on you always, can't I? Naruto simply nodded, the determination in his eyes never wavering. Finally the two broke apart when they heard a loud and very intentional coughing. Sheepishly they turned to look at the head monk who had his arms crossed and a single eyebrow raised. As I was saying, he tilted his head slightly, waiting for an interruption. When none came he smiled serenely before continuing. There may be a way yet. He turned towards Naruto with an intensive expression which made the small boy slightly nervous. Naruto, you did something while Sora was under the influence of the fox's chakra. None of the monks had ever seen anything like it. It was almost as if you were drawing the chakra right off of him and into yourself. You even healed as you were doing it. Naruto just blinked in surprise before looking up and rubbing the back of his head. I did. I don't remember that. All I remember is holding onto Sora and wishing that he would just stop. I didn't want to see him that way, covered by that foul chakra. Chukaku's other eyebrow joined his first momentarily before a similarly thoughtful expression appeared on his own face. Naruto, I want you to do something for me. The blonde just nodded quickly. He had long since stopped questioning the head monk's orders, even though he never phrased them as such. Touch my arm and think back to that moment, like when you first started to train in your gravity manipulation. Naruto seemed confused and unsure, but nevertheless he grabbed a hold of the old man's arm and began to think back. Like everything in the past year, he could easily conjure up the memories of the previous night. As the sight of red chakra and the acrid smell of smoke along with the desperation and sadness filled his recollection, he began to feel a strange pull from the contact with Chukaku. Likewise the elderly monk looked at his arm in amazement. He could quite clearly feel his chakra being siphoned off into Naruto at a rather substantial pace. If he didn't have as much chakra as he did, only rivaled by Chiraku and unknowingly Naruto in the temple, he might have been worried. Like that time a year ago, Naruto suddenly found words that weren't his own leaving his lips, that same instinctual feeling filling him up. Pray to path. Chukaku's eyes widened in amazement as he felt the rate his chakra was being drawn in substantially increase. He quickly pulled his arm out of Naruto's grip and thankfully he felt the process stop, but he suddenly felt quite tired, like he had spent a few hours training. Naruto on the other hand looked incredibly refreshed, the slight bags under his eyes from fitful sleep vanishing. Sora had watched the whole ordeal with a curious gaze before mumbling something about blondes getting all the luck. Well, that was interesting. Naruto looked up at the old monk expectantly, as if waiting for some kind of explanation for what just happened. After a moment of thought, Chukaku nodded, seemingly to himself, before looking back down. You said, pray to path, Naruto, was it like what you told me about the names of those gravity techniques? After a quick nod, Chukaku hummed again. Perhaps this is one of the 6 paths that gave the sage his name, which might make those gravity techniques another. Almost on reflex, Naruto once again found another set of phantom words pass through his mind. Diva path. Chukaku and Sora blinked at Naruto as the blonde looked sheepishly away. I think it's the Diva path. Chukaku blinked one more time before standing up and moving over to the window. Interesting, that means there are 4 more you have yet to discover. He looked back around and for a moment Naruto was reminded of the times he had spoken with his Gigi. The two had the same look. Only time will tell if you will discover them or not, but I'm sure if you do, you will master them. He sighed, wishing he had a pipe to draw upon, but he had given up that habit years ago to support the clean body ideal the temple upheld. For now though, I believe that is enough. Too much information in one sitting can be as bad as anything in excess. Get some food, we have plenty of time to figure things out. He watched as the 2 boys stood, bowed and left the room, bickering almost as soon as their feet landed outside his door. So you held me, huh? Sora had a mischievous smirk on his face as Naruto froze with his face flush with embarrassment. Gah, you're just jealous I had to be the one to save you. Sora never lost his haughty expression even as he began laughing, one hand on Naruto's shoulder as the two walked further away from the study. Chukaku watched them go with a fond smile, glad that even this experience had done nothing to dampen their spirits and their friendship. It was rare to see a bond so strong, especially one that held against hardships like these. The next few months flew by very quickly for Naruto. He had made a promise and he intended to keep it. He had wholeheartedly thrown himself into finding a way to free Sora of the burden inside of him. He now spent hours each day holed up in the library, poring over books, but that wasn't to say he neglected his training or other studies. He still made time to do everything, although he now found his day very tightly packed. The other monks weren't too surprised. After all, he had once meditated for 3 days straight just to prove a point. Fuinjutsu had briefly caught his eye. It was what sealed the chakra into him and Sora in the first place, however that turned up a dead end. Learning and mastering sealing to that level required years of intense study, time Naruto had, but he felt Sora did not. It wasn't obvious, but there were subtle signs that each day Sora was becoming more and more affected by Kyuubi's chakra. Brief flashes of unreasonable anger, his eyes flaring red occasionally, and worst of all, his arm. Sora's arm had always been a concern for him, but now it was permanently stuck in its more demonic form. What Naruto needed was time, or at least a way to decrease the time it would take him to learn Fuinjutsu, what he had thought was an impossibility. However, to his surprise, when he brought the matter to Chiriku, he had instantly thought of a solution, a technique known only to Konoha ninja, but shared with the Fire Temple due to them being affiliated, the Shadow Clone technique. It seemed so perfect at first. Now Naruto could split his attention as much as he wanted, and all he would have to deal with was a small headache at the end of the day. In theory, with his chakra reserve, he should be able to create hundreds of clones that could all share their memories with him. Of course, things were never so simple for the blonde. As soon as he tried to create any clones, he ran into a problem, if you could call it that. It turned out that due to the clones having Rinnegan eyes as well, Naruto shared his vision with them and them with him. It had certainly been a surreal experience for the blonde to suddenly find himself staring in about 100 different directions at once, not to mention intensely confusing and painful. Right now he could only deal with his vision split 3 ways, but it was still very distracting. Chukaku theorized that with practice he could increase the amount of clones he could deal with, so each day he would spend about an hour just acclimatizing to it. He found out by accident as a clone watched him spar with Sora that it gave him a unique advantage in that a single clone could cover his blind spots while 3 could practically eliminate them entirely, and all they had to do was sit still and watch. Of course they were fragile, and once Sora realized what he was doing, he quickly went about destroying them as soon as possible. Luckily, with Naruto's incredible reserves, it was fairly simple to just remake them once popped. Sora too had learnt the Shadow Clone technique, and thanks to his own demonic chakra, which gave him substantial reserves, if not comparable with Naruto's or any other Jinchuriki, he quickly made good use of them. He did not suffer from the same problems Naruto did, although they found the mental exhaustion was much more taxing on him, limiting him to how many clones he could make a day. Still, it allowed him to study inside with clones while meditating or training outside, freeing up some of his day. However, with pretty much all of Naruto's day taken up, Sora found himself with a lot of free time. Of course, every problem has a solution in time, and while picking up after Naruto in the library, he became interested by a book on sealing and had taken up learning the art. He of course made liberal use of shadow clones in the process, but pretty soon he was impressing the other monks by drawing out various simple barrier and strengthening seals. Naruto, on the other hand, was looking down different avenues, namely his dujutsu. He had thrown himself into trying to understand his elusive eyes, relentlessly training his Diva and Preta path. Strangely, he had found that the Preta path was not simply the ability to absorb chakra as he had first thought, but direct it. In that way he could either pull it into his own body, or likewise push his own into someone else's, instantly adapting the chakra to its new body. He found he could even push chakra into the ground or inanimate objects, however it did little more than strengthen them, and if he pushed enough it give them a blue glow. On another note, he had also spent time researching the sage himself, hoping to gain insight into his powers and perhaps hints on potential abilities. Apart from the more outlandish things like the myth about the moon, there was barely any information on the man himself, just like all information on that period in history. Naruto couldn't even figure out exactly when the man had lived or where. The only useful information was that he had a number of special possessions that were now considered sacred in many places. Once again he was surprised when he brought that information to Chukaku. The man had smiled but said nothing, instead leading Naruto deep underground the temple via passageways the young blonde didn't even know existed. Finally they had reached a large vault where some of the more precious or sacred items the Fire Temple held in its possession were kept. There were even some treasures from the fire daimyo's personal collection that the man wanted protected and didn't want to use ninja. However, that wasn't the surprise. That came when Chukaku had shown him an old shakuju. It looked ordinary enough, but apparently it was said to have belonged to the sage himself. According to very ancient records, it was a gift to one of the man's closest friends who had later gone on to found the fire temple itself, becoming the first head monk. It was kept in the vault as it consumed massive amounts of chakra just by being held, killing an ordinary person in moments and an average Junin in about 10 minutes. Naruto had gone to pick it up, but Chukaku had held him back, telling him it wasn't the time for that just yet. So now Naruto was sitting in a field around the back of the living quarters. It was one of his favorite places to meditate as it held a small pond with a single stone at the center he could rest on. He was feeling for his chakra, examining its flow as it moved and slid through his pathways, sometimes quickly, other times like it wasn't even moving at all. He had been told by Chiriku he possessed incredible control over his chakra, especially for someone with reserves as large as his own. Once again Chukaku theorized it was to do with his Rinnegan. He had equated it to the chakra being a lumpy fluid and the Rinnegan being a kind of strainer. The lumpy fluid that was uncontrolled chakra moved through the pathways, sticking to the sides and causing friction which unbalanced the entire system. When it passed through his eyes it would be strained, becoming more fluid and less viscous. This way it would cause less friction and gave Naruto unparalleled control, at least that was the only way the head monk could explain it. He felt his chakra move around his stomach, close to his gate of view, when a small frown creased his brow for just a moment. There was a small, almost unnoticeable pull on his chakra in that area, draining it out of his pathways and into something else. He knew what it was, of course, the seal that held the Kyuubi within him. He thought about how easy it would be to simply pull back on that chakra, stop it from flowing into the seal. It would only take a single thought. Of course that would degrade the prison quickly, in no time releasing the Kyuubi's chakra within him in a way he was sure wouldn't be the most pleasant experience for him. However, he decided to focus on that, feeling the way his chakra was leached out, focusing intently on the seal and the way his own chakra moved through it. He could also feel the Kyuubi's chakra leaking into his own system, being almost immediately converted into a more usable form by both the seal and his Preta path, which he realized must have been working subconsciously since the Rinnegan had activated. Suddenly he felt a familiar tug on his mind that he hadn't felt in a few months. He succumbed to it, allowing his own consciousness to fall deep within himself. So you've returned. Naruto opened his eyes and sure enough he found himself back in the enormous room that represented the seal, the enormous bars before him and the biju beyond it. Kyuubi. Naruto gave a small inclination of his head before feeling a large gust of warm air blow over him as the great fox snorted contemptuously. No need for the pleasantries, Ninjin. Why have you come here, or do you enjoy flaunting your freedom before your prisoner? Naruto frowned at that as he took a seat on the floor, pulling his legs towards him to sit in a loose cross-legged pose. He couldn't quite see it, but the Kyuubi frowned at that in the darkness of his cell. It was a position he had seen many times over from one he would never see again. You know, I never asked to have you sealed inside of me. Again he felt the warm breath of the Kyuubi wash over him as the large fox snorted, this time in amusement. So you have come to whine about the injustice of your pathetic existence. How typical of your kind. Naruto didn't bat an eye. He had thought long and hard about the situation between him and his tenant and no longer feared the Kyuubi, at least as long as it was safely locked away within him. You speak as if you know humans. Deep in the darkness of the cell he saw a solitary red eye crack open, the slit pupil swiveling until it settled on his form. I know about your kind, far more than I care to remember, or even wish to. For a long time there was silence between the two, and when it was clear neither intended to speak, the great fox grunted in annoyance, its eye closing again. What happened? Again there was silence. This time it was almost palpable. The Kyuubi didn't move, but somehow Naruto felt all its attention was squarely on him. What happened to make you hate so much? Again a loud grunt echoed through the large cage, the bars trembling slightly as the mighty fox raised itself onto its paws. Slowly it lumbered over to the cage entrance, each step reverberating around the space and making the ground quake. Finally Naruto got a good look at the creature. Its orange fur glistened in the light that could now reach it, with black markings reaching up from around its eyes to its ears that seemed to belong more to a rabbit than a fox. 9 long tails swayed slowly in sync behind its giant body, each looking like they could take off the top of a mountain with an absent flick. Strangely, it had a rather humanoid torso with hands and arms instead of front paws. Other than that, it looked just like its title suggested, a large fox with 9 tails. Time Ningen, time happened. Time will produce more hatred in a being than any number of pitiful grudges or grievances, and I just happened to be cursed by the gift of immortality. Its large red eyes narrowed as it once again sunk onto its belly, the long tails wrapping almost protectively around its body. Why do you care to ask such pointless things, Ningen? What could you possibly gain from it? A means to control me. Are you not satisfied with waiting for this accursed seal to finish siphoning away my chakra into you? Its gaze remained solely on the blonde, piercing him, awaiting the reply it already expected. I wish to understand you. It blinked once, a sight that might have been comical had the situation been different. That had not been the answer it had been expecting, and its eyes quickly narrowed again. Then you will fail, now be gone. Naruto once again felt the tug on his mind, however this time he was prepared. He resisted the pull and remained exactly where he was. The Kyuubi had gotten up to return to its spot in the darkness, but when he felt he was not alone he turned back around. Why do you try my patience, Ningen? Let me have my peace. However, Naruto didn't move, he didn't even blink. In fact, his eyes had been closed since the fox had begun speaking. Is that what you want? Peace. The Biju stopped, its tail slowly coming to rest behind it as the head turned. Red eyes searched Naruto's unmoving form, once again unnerved by the similarities it spotted between the two. Then why attack Konoha? Why harm people that you find so insignificant? What did you have to gain? Surprisingly, Naruto heard growling within the cage, and when he opened his eyes he found the face of the Kyuubi uncomfortably close to the bars of the cage, its lips bared to show its enormous teeth. Do not try me, Ningen. I have no reason to explain myself to you or any of your wretched kind. Continue to irritate me and I will make sure that when I claw my way out of this cursed seal it is the single most agonizing moment in your short, pathetic life. It finished with an almost dismissive flick of its tails as it raised its head high up above Naruto, the boy almost losing the Biju in the darkness of the cell. Now I said leave. Again Naruto felt the tug, but it was much stronger than before. He was unable to resist and he was forcibly ejected from the seal. When it was finally satisfied it was alone again, the fox retreated back into the cage, far into the darkness where it couldn't even see itself, and the entrance was a mere pinprick of light. It curled up around itself, its 9 tails wrapping around its form as it went to sleep, a frown on its brow. Chapter 5, Fire Part 5. If we do not plant knowledge when we are young, it will give us no shade for when we are old. Lord Chesterfield. A lone figure, illuminated into shadow by the setting sun behind him, strode over the crest of an enormous sand dune, a trail of slowly disappearing footsteps in his wake. A long brown cloak billowed in the warm breeze behind him, protecting his body from the harsh desert winds and sandstorms that were common for the area. He wasn't very tall or imposing, barely standing at a somewhat respectable height of 4 feet and 7 inches for his age. However, there was something about him that if somebody saw him pass by it would catch their attention. Perhaps it was the single Magatama bead dangling from his ear that glinted as it caught the fading light of the sun. Maybe it was the occasional hits of bright blonde hair that would appear from underneath his hood when the wind would blow it back. It might have even been the tall shakuju that jingled with each of his steps, the staff actually reaching higher than he himself was tall. More than likely though, it was the fact that as soon as any sand on the wind came within a meter of his form it would bounce back, as if repelled by some invisible force or barrier. The figure came to a stop, resting slightly on the staff that surprisingly didn't sink into the sand at all, despite supporting his weight. He gazed around for a moment, the shadows his hood provided hiding the direction his eyes were looking. Finally he tugged it back, releasing a shock of bright golden hair, tied up at the back into the beginning of a short, spiky ponytail. He enjoyed the view around him of vast dunes of golden sand stretching off into the distance as far as the eye could see, warm but steely violet eyes narrowed into slits. His protective cloak continued to billow as he simply stood there, enjoying the moment as the scorching day began to descend into freezing night. Leaving a brief twilight hour where everything was still and peaceful. Stars began to peek out of the sky, emboldened by the slow descent of the sun retreating behind the horizon. A fond smile found its way across his whiskered cheeks as he thought back to the events that led him here, the good and the bad. Good morning Naruto, you look much better now that you've had time to settle and eat. How are you finding the temple so far? A young blonde looked up with a smile that held both excitement and unending gratitude toward the much older monk. It's great. The monks are really nice, and even though Sora can be really annoying sometimes, he is friendly and helps me with stuff when Chiriku is busy. Chukaku smiled contentedly as he ruffled Naruto's hair. The blonde was so happy about his new life that he didn't even care. I'm glad. Just make sure that if there's anything you need or if you ever have any questions or concerns, you come right to me. Okay. The small whiskered child nodded excitedly, making Chukaku's heart warm to see such innocence return to the boy's features. Master Chukaku, there is something Chiriku-senpai wanted me to talk to you about. The wizened monk hummed for the boy to continue with a small nod. He said that I should be able to turn off my Rinnegan, but I can't pull the chakra out of my eyes. Chukaku raised an eyebrow at that, looking closely at Naruto's eyes and felt around for his chakra. Sure enough, there was a small build-up behind his eyes, obviously what was keeping the Rinnegan active. I don't believe there is anything to worry about, Naruto. It is true that Sharingan and Byakugan wielders alike have the ability to deactivate their Dujutsu, but the Rinnegan is far more mysterious than theirs. For all we know, it cannot be deactivated by the will of the user. He smiled fondly as he ushered the blonde closer, planting a warm hand on the boy's shoulder. Then again, maybe you simply lack the control to do so. Don't forget you have only recently begun to train in the use and control of your chakra. The boy scowled at that but still seemed to accept the older man's words. Do you feel any more tired than before you received those eyes? Naruto quickly shook his head in the negative. Did they cause you any pain at all? Again he got a quick head shake to say no. Do you feel at all uncomfortable with people seeing your eyes? This time Chukaku saw Naruto hesitate for a moment before shaking his head more slowly and uncertainly. Chukaku smiled knowingly as he got to a knee, something that was increasingly difficult as he got older. Naruto, it is perfectly alright to be afraid of something new, but I hope you understand that the eyes you now possess were a gift, one you have earned from your hardships. He chuckled slightly as he pulled himself back to his feet, ruffling the boy's hair as he did so. This time it did earn him a look of annoyance. If worst comes to worst and you still feel uncomfortable, then do what I do. He smiled childishly even though his eyes stayed narrowed as always. He was glad to see Naruto giggle a little, his usual confidence returning. Thanks Master Chukaku, you're really smart. The wizened monk grinned again, ushering the young blonde out of his office playfully. And don't you forget it. Naruto smiled fondly at the warm memory, eyes crinkled into slits in a way that had always seemed to annoy Sora, so of course Naruto had begun to do it all the time, copying their aging master. He began to walk again, slowly and carefully descending the dune, the staff in his right hand jingling with every movement. He looked up for a moment, spotting the moon begin to show itself in the last moments of sunlight still streaming in over the horizon. Naruto sat up on the roof of the living quarters building, just staring up at the sky, specifically the moon. In his eyes it seemed to radiate a thin silver aura that Naruto always found beautiful since coming to the temple. He wasn't supposed to be up here. In fact, the caretaker always got incredibly annoyed when he found the young blonde up on the roof. Even so, Naruto couldn't sleep, his dreams once again invaded by scenes of destruction and wreckage. It was like he was in a body not his own, looking through eyes that weren't his down on events he had no control over. The nightmares didn't come that often, but when they did he could never go back to sleep. Instead he would come up here and just think for a while, about his new life, about the future, about the responsibilities his powers and burden placed on his shoulders. He heard soft footsteps on the tiles and looked up, expecting to see Shigesu ready to berate him for not respecting the sacredness of the temple roof. Instead he was surprised to find Sora there instead, the boy walking over with perfect balance to sit next to the blonde. Nightmare again. Naruto simply nodded, his eyes drifting back to the mysterious white orb hanging in the sky. The same one. Again Naruto nodded as his head drooped, pulling his knees up into his chest protectively. Always. Sora sighed as he placed a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder, which did relax Naruto slightly. Suddenly he tensed, pulling away from the contact as he turned his eyes away from Sora, instead following a crack along a roof tile. I'm sorry, Sora. The blue-haired pseudo-Jinchuriki just looked around in confusion, blinking in surprise at Naruto's cold tone. For what? The blonde sighed deeply as he once again faced forward, this time looking out, over the temple and into the surrounding forests. It's been almost 3 months and I haven't found anything to help you yet. I haven't kept my promise to you. Sora blinked for a moment before a sad smile slipped onto his features as he too looked out over the temple, in vaguely the same direction as his friend was. I never asked you to make that silly promise, what you're trying to do should be impossible anyway. Naruto scoffed at that, but some of the cold edge disappeared, his eyes narrowing in a challenging way. Like the sage creating the moon. Naruto laughed at his own comment but was surprised when Sora suddenly lay back on the roof, staring up at the faraway disc. Hey, what if he did it? I mean really did it? Naruto blinked before falling back next to his friend. Then he'd be way more powerful than even the legends make him out to be. Sora smirked slightly at that, pulling his hands up to rest underneath his head. I'm going to be like that one day. He heard Naruto scoff next to him and was immediately up on his elbows, tick mark quickly forming on his temple. What's so funny? Naruto just grinned as he continued to stare at the moon, completely uncaring of the looming fist of his friend. Please, if you ever get that powerful then I'll be able to move the moon around with a flick of my wrist. This time it was Sora's turn to scoff as the anger leaked out of him, turning into amusement as he flopped back down onto his back. Right, moving the moon. He chuckled at himself, what was I thinking? Naruto finally looked around, the challenge clearly sparkling in his eyes as his earlier sadness seemed a thing of the past. You're on. Sora blinked in surprise, an incredulous expression developing on his face as he just stared at his blonde friend in shock. That wasn't a challenge, Naruto. Naruto snorted, crossing his arms and looking away haughtily in an exaggerated impersonation of the blue-haired boy. Just because you know you'll lose. Sora was immediately on his feet, his fist raised and other finger pointed accusingly at the blonde. I'll never lose to you. He blinked in surprise when Naruto just burst out laughing, the anger ebbing out of him as he realized it had been a joke. A few minutes later and they were once again on their backs, just staring up at the sky. So how would you do it? Sora just looked around in confusion at the blonde who had an unusually thoughtful expression. How would you move the moon? Sora blinked slowly before shrugging. I don't know, but you know what Master Chukaku says, if there is a problem we can't solve, as long as we have friends they'll be there to lighten the burden. Naruto smiled fondly at that, a small chuckle gracing his lips. Yeah, I guess you're right. He trailed off, blinking once, then twice, then a few more times as he suddenly shot up into a sitting position. Sora could swear he saw the cogs turning in the boy's head before Naruto suddenly shot to his feet, his eyes wide with excitement. That's it. Before Sora could even ask he found both his hands grabbed, pulling him into a standing position as Naruto began to bounce around the rooftop with him. Sora, you're a genius. The blue-haired boy blinked before a small blush settled over his nose and a rather haughty smile fell on his features. Well, I don't know. When he looked up though Naruto was gone, the pseudo-Jinchuriki looked around but his blonde friend had vanished. Ahem. Sora froze suddenly, his head slowly swiveling to look at a very irate Shigesu holding his almost infamous wooden spoon in one hand as he taped it irritably against his forearm. Well, what do we have here? Sora began to stutter as he backed away from the clearly angry caretaker before stopping as he reached the edge of the roof. Well, you see, Shigesu-senpai, well, you see, it's like. Damn it, Naruto. Naruto laughed fondly at the memory as he began to climb up another large dune, neither the steep climb nor loose footing seemingly giving him any trouble. He had replaced his hood, the shadows once again falling over his face, as well as pulling up a scarf to cover his mouth and whisker marks. It was beginning to grow cold as sun vanished, the heat in the ground quickly dispersing and rising up into the air. He absently rubbed a phantom wound on his side as he thought about another life-changing event from the past 4 years. Geez, Naruto, calm down, would you? You'd think you were the one who was finally getting rid of their inner demon. Even though Sora tried to sound nonchalant about the whole business, he couldn't keep his own excitement out of his voice. It was finally happening. After Naruto had run off and left him on the roof to deal with a certain angry caretaker, Sora had gone out to find him. Apparently something about their conversation had given Naruto an idea on how to finally free Sora of the Kyuubi's chakra. He didn't understand the technical version of the blonde's plan, but simplified it pretty much involved him using many shadow clones to siphon off the Kyuubi's chakra. The main problem with removing a biju from the host was that such a large amount of such potent and corrosive chakra being channeled through a specific spot on the Jinchuriki, namely the seal, caused an overload of the chakra network in that area, creating a chain reaction which killed the host. Only those with incredibly potent chakra of their own or a durable body would be able to survive such a thing. Unfortunately, most unsealing methods did exactly that, unseal the binding on the biju. This meant the chakra would be freed all at once, in one place. Using Naruto's Preta path, they had a unique opportunity to draw out the chakra directly, from as many different places as Naruto could make clones. Of course it would still hurt, but with the extraction being spread out it wouldn't be fatal, or even all that damaging. Of course it was only speculation, so any complications that might arise were completely unknown. Chukaku had at first seemed hesitant when Naruto brought this before him, but ultimately he believed it was Sora's choice. Overjoyed at the chance to finally be rid of what he firmly saw as a curse and burden, the blue-haired boy practically jumped at the chance. Of course, just to be safe, Naruto had spent a few weeks practicing with his Preta path to make sure everything was ready. It would do no good to draw out Sora's chakra with the Kyubis. Come on, what's taking so long? One of the 4 clones Naruto had created looked up in irritation, the others following suit from afar in a way Sora found slightly creepy. The shared vision may have been useful in a fight, but the pseudo Jinchuriki always found it strange when the multiple blondes would do things in unison. Then again, that was only to be expected when they were all essentially the same person with the same sight. Be patient, you've been waiting 4 months for this, you can wait a few more minutes for the monks to finish their seal. Sure enough, around them a few monks were drawing out a large and powerful containment seal on the ground. It was more for the sake of comfort than actual protection. If worst came to worst, it wouldn't hold out all that long against a cubified Sora. Yeah, speak for yourself, I can't wait to be finally free. Naruto just smiled at his friend. For the past week or so Sora had become more and more anxious. He was happy to see his friend so excited, but he also thought it would be rather strange after all was said and done. He had always kind of enjoyed knowing that he and Sora shared the same burden. It was something that connected them, an unspoken bond of understanding. He shook the thoughts off as he finally got the all clear from the monks as they retreated to a safe distance. Alright, let's do this. Sora matched the blonde's grin as they moved to the center of the ceiling array. Naruto quickly created 10 shadow clones, most of which immediately closed their eyes to spare Naruto a rather intense headache. The ones that didn't led their clone brethren into a small ring with Sora at the center, each finding a spot to hold onto Sora with both hands. The original smiled warmly as he rested his hands directly on Sora's chest, already able to feel the gentle yet excited flow of his chakra. You ready? Sora seemed hesitant for a moment, but one look at the determination in his friend's steely eyes and that hesitation vanished with a small nod. Without further ceremony, Naruto closed his eyes and began to focus on his path, feeling past Sora to the seal on his stomach. The feeling of the Kyubi's chakra was unmistakable within the seal, flowing quickly and erratically without a proper conscious mind to guide it. Naruto latched onto it, as did his 10 clones, and slowly they began to draw it out. The change was immediate as the virulent red chakra began flowing through Sora, pushing his less potent chakra aside. He was enshrouded by a familiar cloak, this time only one tail swaying behind him as Naruto held back the rest of the chakra, managing its flow through Sora and into him with care. The boy at the center of all this began to pant heavily. It felt like his body was slowly being roasted from the inside. Naruto noticed the red seep into his friend's eyes as soon as it happened, but he couldn't speed up the process any faster and he would begin to burn away Sora's chakra network. He just gritted his teeth, hoping he could finish before anything could happen. He should have known it would be a tall order as Sora began to thrash inside his circle of blondes, first the tail, then the clawed hands. The clones did their best to keep him steady and contained, but being as weak and fragile as they were, it wasn't much. Naruto couldn't risk them popping early either, that would cause an influx of chakra that could be dangerous for him. He was so focused on drawing out the chakra and keeping his clones from bursting under Sora's wild swings he missed the bubbling red tail suddenly lunge at him from below. His cry echoed into the courtyard as the tail pierced his side, the burning from the vile chakra almost as bad as the wound itself. Come on Sora, don't give up just yet. Or nearly there. The wound was already closing as the chakra he absorbed went to work healing it. However, a clone was less lucky as the tail was once again brought around, slamming straight through its head. The original blonde winced at the influx of memories and chakra but held out just long enough for the last of the burning red cloak to ebb away. Naruto was able to give Sora one last smile before falling backwards, exhausted. Sora looked down at the unconscious blonde as he felt a wave of exhaustion hit him as well. Before he fell into the arms of one of the clones, he managed a weak smile. "You kept your promise after all." Naruto realized what he was doing and stopped rubbing his side. The wound hadn't even scarred, but he remembered it vividly enough. He hadn't woken up for a whole day after that, the strain on his body from the extra Biju chakra proving too much for him. If it hadn't been for his Preta path and the seal siphoning off the excess, he probably would have died. As it was, neither he nor Sora received any lasting damage. In fact, Sora's chakra system had been stretched quite a bit during the whole ordeal, leaving him with much larger reserves than before. However, that was a double-edged sword as his control went completely haywire. Something moving caught his eye, and as he looked around he caught the bushy tail of a desert fox just disappearing over the peak of the dune he himself was climbing. That immediately sent his thoughts towards the other fox in his life as he looked down at his stomach. The small blonde sat calmly in a meditative position just outside the bars of the Kyuubi's cage, far enough that its claws could not reach him. The great fox was in its usual position deep within its cell. However, every few minutes or so it would crack a single eye, observing its vessel with mild curiosity. Finally, after about an hour of nothing but the sounds of the enormous Biju breathing, the Kyuubi pulled itself to its feet, walking over to the bars of the cage. "What is it you are doing, Rinnegan?" Naruto didn't open his eyes, he didn't even move, he just continued to calmly sit there, focusing on the feel of his chakra through his body. After about 5 minutes, in which the great beast grew increasingly irritated to the point where it was about to bang against the bars, he spoke. "I'm meditating." Enormous red eyes narrowed in indignation far above the peaceful human as its 9 tails swayed dangerously. The blonde was unfazed, he was now too used to the Kyuubi's hollow attempts at intimidation to even notice. "I can see that, Rinnegan." The smallest of smirks tweaked at the corners of Naruto's mouth, but he still didn't move. "Then why did you ask?" His response was a large gust of wind as the Kyuubi grunted in annoyance. "Do you enjoy trying my patience, Rinnegan?" The usually loud and domineering voice was reduced to a low menacing growl which barely fazed the meditating monk in training. "It's pretty amusing, I'll admit." The blonde finally let his hands rest at his sides as he looked up, his face adopting the same expression as his master with a serene smile and narrowed eyes. It was something he had been working on to both honor his teacher and irritate Sora, a win-win. "And my name is Naruto." This time he didn't even get an immediate response, just the background sounds of the enormous tail swishing back and forth. "All you Rinnegan look alike, why should I concern myself with such petty trivialities?" Naruto shrugged nonchalantly, looking away for a moment as if in serious thought about the obviously rhetorical question. "Common courtesy." Again all he got was an indignant snort as the great fox lay down on its stomach, head rested on its paws. "Is there any particular reason for this visit, Rinnegan? Do you not remember how all of our past encounters have gone?" Naruto did in fact remember. He would come into the seal, attempt to gain a sliver of insight into the Kyuubi's motives or thoughts, only to be rebuked and occasionally, forcefully ejected from the seal. He had gotten better at resisting it, though once H found Kyuubi was using his chakra to push him out, it was a simple task to simply absorb it instead. The fox had stopped trying after the 3rd attempt, opting instead to ignore the pest, at least until today. "I wanted to ask you about the sage." The Kyuubi merely growled at him. It would have been incredibly threatening save for the enormous bars that stood between the two. "You once said I couldn't compare to him, that means you must have known him." Suddenly the growling stopped, and when Naruto looked up he saw the Kyuubi looking away, off into the darkness of the cell. "What is this, Rinnegan? Have you given up on your foolish quest to understand me?" The great fox frowned as the blonde simply grinned in response. It unnerved the Biju to see somebody so calm stand, or sit, before him. The last person to do that was long dead, and the powerful being suddenly had to remind itself of that fact as it gazed down at the smiling blonde. "Oh no, I never give up on anything, but I think you'll talk to me when you are ready." Ignoring the indignant grunt of denial that followed, he continued. "I simply want to learn more about my ancestor." It would be nice to know something about the original wielder of my eyes. How else am I supposed to live up to his legacy? He blinked when he found the great beast strangely quiet, not even a dismissive growl was thrown his way. If that is your wish, then you should simply give up now. The sage of the six paths was a god amongst you Rinnegan. You will never even hope to attain even a sliver of the power that man wielded in a single hand. Naruto actually gawked for a moment. That had been the most passionate thing he had heard from the Kyuubi that had not been out of anger. The fox seemed to realize that as well and quickly resets its features into the usual scowl. Recovering quickly, the same serene smile was quickly on Naruto's face. It sounds like you admire him. The Kyuubi looked down at the blonde, its slitted pupils narrowing slightly, however there was no denying grunt or snort. He had my respect. Naruto blinked again. This conversation was just full of surprises. So there is a side of you that is not simply rage and anger. As if to disprove this very point, the Kyuubi growled deeply, glistening white teeth bared. Naruto filed the sage away as a touchy subject for the fox before standing up, dusting himself off despite the floor being immaculately clean. Well, I better be going now, don't think this is over. The Kyuubi's answer was to get back up and slink off into the darkness, which Naruto couldn't help but compare to a petulant child. Whatever you say, Rinnegan. With a satisfied nod, Naruto took another look around the room before seemingly fading from existence. After that, Naruto had slowly managed to worm information out of the rather petulant fox. No matter how indignant the Kyuubi might appear, it was fairly easy for Naruto to rile it up enough, get it to let slip some information. It was all about pushing the buttons necessary to irritate it, something the blonde was exceedingly skilled at. It helped Naruto could create essentially anything he could imagine within the seal, even if the ability did not extend to the seal itself. It seemed the fourth Hokage had no wish for the Kyuubi to find a way to make his prison more hospitable. According to the very vehement opinion of the Kyuubi, the sage was a very different person to Naruto. He was incredibly calm and level-headed, always having a plan for pretty much any situation, and when he didn't, he easily made up for it in pure unadulterated power. However, begrudgingly, the great fox admitted the two had their similarities, their attitudes towards never giving up for one. Apparently they also shared similar beliefs on peace, although whether or not that was due to their shared experiences as monks was debatable. Either way, the fox was oddly aggressive when it came to the sage's various views and beliefs, never revealing too much. Naruto sighed as he began the long trudge up yet another dune. All he had on this monotonous trek through the shifting, scorching sands were his thoughts and memories. A light jangling from his shakuju suddenly broke his concentration, a soft smile gracing his lips as he looked at it. To his eyes it glowed with its own inner light, a pale blue that always managed to calm his swirling thoughts. It wasn't even 5 days ago he had received it, on the day he left the temple. I'm gonna miss you, man. Naruto smiled sadly at his friend as the two came together for a warm hug. I'll miss you too. The blonde chuckled as they pulled away, his hand still on the former Jinchuriki's shoulder. But you know me, I'll be back. It's only a few years at most. Suddenly the two felt hands on their shoulders. Looking around, they found Chiriku smiling at them fondly. Indeed, it is always a joyous occasion when a monk elects to go on a journey to find themselves, and at the same time it is filled with much melancholy. Nevertheless, it is a part of becoming a monk that we all must go through at some point. When Naruto returns, he will not only be stronger, but wiser from it. The blonde grinned appreciatively at his senpai. When he came back from this trip, he wouldn't have to call him that anymore. Sora, on the other hand, gave a small, but playful snort. PFF'd. Naruto become wiser, you would have an easier time getting that spoon away from Shigesu. His face became slightly more serious as he turned back around, pulling something out of his robe pocket. But seriously, you better become stronger, man. I wouldn't want you to come back and be too easily defeated by me. He opened his hand, revealing a small bead shaped like a comma with a hole in the rounder part. Naruto had seen them worn by various monks around the temple before. As necklaces are attached to their belts, it was a magatama. Wow, thanks Sora. He picked up the small earring with a grin, quickly clipping it to his ear, the small white bead catching the sun for a moment. I appreciate it. He really did. It was a thoughtful gift, supposed to bring good luck on travels. There is something else, young Naruto-kun. The blonde turned to see Chukaku standing behind Chiriku. He wasn't quite sure when the old head monk had gotten there. It is quite likely you will face hardships and perils along your journey, as well as find joys and wisdom. The two often walk hand in hand. Along that line I would like to give you something I would hope grants you even the smallest protection. Suddenly the man produced a long wooden case out of seemingly thin air, holding it out to the blonde before opening it. A shakuju. Naruto was confused as it was rather irregular for a monk in training to receive his own staff. It was usually awarded after their self-pilgrimage. You don't recognize it? Looking closer, the blonde gasped in surprise as he did in fact recognize the old wooden staff. With a slightly shaking hand he reached out and took the shakuju in his hand, not noticing as the monks looked on in interest. As he gripped the sturdy staff he immediately felt a pull on his chakra as it began to slowly drain into the weapon tool. Immediately he stopped the flow, pulling back on his chakra with his preta path. The sage's staff. You are giving me this. Chukaku, after saying that the staff seemed to have no detrimental effect on the boy, nodded with a serene smile. Of course, it is part of your legacy, treat it well. The young Jinchuriki just nodded dumbly before stepping forward, wrapping his small arms around the old monk in a warm hug. Thanks Moss. Thanks Gigi, for everything you've done for me. Chukaku gently rubbed the boy's hair, his eyes opened for once as he didn't want to miss a single second of the departure of a boy he had come to see as a surrogate grandson. You're very much welcome Naruto-kun. Again Naruto schooled his face into his usual serene mask as he climbed over the peak of what seemed like his 1000th dune. He was truly sad leaving the temple behind him, but he knew that was not the last he would see of it. However, that wasn't to say he not excited, it was as though he was finally starting a new chapter in his life. There, far off on the horizon, as if to cement that idea, was a small, almost unnoticeable dot. Of course Naruto could see much with his eyes and he knew exactly what that dot was. Sunagakure no Sato was in sight.